Hey there. Tonight we're exploring the strange and sleepy history of Groundhog Day, tracing Candlemas candles and German badger lore to a Pennsylvania groundhog named Phil. Not the Hollywood time loop, just centuries of quiet weather lore. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone. Perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. Every February 2nd, before sunrise, in a Pennsylvania clearing with a name that sounds like a 19th century bar bet, Gobbler's Knob, men in black top hats crowd around a tree stump to consult a weather expert who literally spent the last 3 months asleep. This is a real civic ritual. There are fireworks, there is polka music, there are speeches, and there is a groundhog called Phil, treated with the ceremonial gravitas of a medieval oracle and the stage lighting of a stadium tour. The scene looks absurd to outsiders and completely normal to the thousands who make the pre-dawn pilgrimage to Punxsutawney, a borough of about 5,700 souls in Jefferson County, Pennsylvania. They gather in the dark cold to meet a legend who rarely weighs more than 7 or 8 pounds. Cameras pan, breath fogs, a scroll is unfurled, and a proclamation booms. If Phil sees his shadow, more winter is promised. If not, an early spring is allegedly on the way. He is introduced, without irony, as Phil, seer of seers, sage of sages, prognosticator of prognosticators. The only thing missing is a choir. This sleepy weather pageant may look like a purely American oddity, cooked up by a chamber of commerce, but the bones of the story are ancient. Long before Phil got his own handlers, hashtags and library habitat, people marked early February with candles, omens, and a healthy fear of the next 6 weeks. The modern festival is a remix, part medieval church calendar, part German folklore, part immigrant adaptation, part boosterish invention, and part Hollywood halo, seasoned with the very American conviction that a small animal might be better at long-range forecasting than the federal government. The date is no accident. February 2nd has been Candlemas for well over a millennium, a Christian feast celebrating the presentation of Jesus at the temple, and the presentation of Jesus, positioned exactly 40 days after Christmas. Pilgrims in Jerusalem were marking it in the late 4th century. A travel writer known as Egeria describes processions and blazing lights around 384 in Rome. The feast took firmer shape in the late 5th century, in the era of Pope Gelasius I. Modern storytellers love to fuse Candlemas with the raucous pagan festival of Lupercalia on February 15th, then credit the church with swapping in sanctified candles for wolf-masked revelry. That tidy narrative has charm and very little hard evidence. Candlemas has stronger documentation in the Christian liturgical stream than in any direct provable takeover of earlier Roman rites. Yet, the calendar's coincidence offered fertile ground for later imaginations and marketing copy, and folklore thrives on plausible echoes. Weather lore did not need Roman wolves. It only needed a grey morning and a nervous farmer. Candlemas, sitting smack in midwinter for the northern hemisphere, attracted proverbs like a wool coat attracts static. The logic also tracks with basic meteorology. A bright, clear February day often signals a cold, high-pressure system locking in. A cloudy, damp one suggests milder air and active fronts. English, Scots, French, and German rhymes line up with that logic like a 16th century focus group. The English version many Americans know today goes O's. If Candlemas Day be fair and bright, winter will have another flight. If Candlemas Day be cloud and rain, winter is gone and will not come again. A Scots saying sharpens it. If Candlemas Day be bright and clear, there'll be 2 winters in the year. In France, this becomes si la chandeleur se passe clair, la hiver est pas derrière, and hiver est pas derrière, and in the German lands that seeded Pennsylvania traditions, farmers had a choice of animal oracles. Bears had the starring role in alpine regions. Badgers took top billing in parts of the Palatinate and beyond. Wenn der Dach seinen Schatten sieht und Licht mess, geht wieder in den Bau, und es gibt noch 6 Wochen Winter, ran a German saying. If the badger sees his shadow on Candlemas, he returns to his den, and there will be 6 more weeks of winter. That animal detail matters. Hedgehogs were also recruited in some places. Bears, badgers, hedgehogs, European fauna that nap, stir, and sometimes pop out during midwinter thaws. When thousands of German-speaking immigrants arrived in Pennsylvania in the 1700s and early 1800s, they brought their Candlemas customs and their weather proverbs. In the New World, there were no hedgehogs, and the American badger lived mostly far to the west. There was, however, an abundantly available, chunky, tunnel-obsessed rodent that hibernated with dedication and popped up reliably in spring. Marmota monax, the groundhog, also called a woodchuck. The name woodchuck is not, despite the tongue twister about lumber and throwing. It likely comes from an Algonquian word, commonly given as woodchuck. The animal was known to indigenous peoples across its range, valued for meat and pelts, and already featured in colonial diaries, mainly as a nuisance and occasionally as dinner. Somewhere in eastern Pennsylvania, a badger's job description found a groundhog substitute. The cleanest early American paper trail shows up on February 4th, 1841, in the diary of a Berks County storekeeper named James Morris. He wrote that the past Tuesday, the 2nd, was Candlemas, the day on which, according to the Germans, the groundhog peeps out of his winter quarters and checks for a shadow, then either retreats for another 6 weeks or stays out if clouds promise milder weather. Folklorists have brandished that entry ever since, like a police report on the scene where superstition turned into a calendar date in Pennsylvania. From there, the lore spread via small-town papers and community almanacs in Pennsylvania Dutch country. That ironically named group of German-speaking settlers whose Dutch was a misunderstanding of Deutsch. The dialect preserved a wealth of sayings and songs, and it still stars at Fisherman's, hosted by Grunzo. Groundhog, lodges, established to keep the dialect alive. Lodge number 1, lodged in 1933, in the Lehigh Valley area, holding midwinter banquets where speeches are delivered entirely in dialect, and anyone slipping into English pays a fine. It is very human to throw a party when snow sits 3 feet deep and spring feels like a rumour. It is also very human to let a charismatic rodent crash that party. Punxsutawney made it into a business plan. The catalyst was a local newspaper editor named Clymer Freeze of the Punxsutawney Spirit. In 1886, he began spinning up stories about a local groundhog as the ascendant weather seer, promoting a groundhog hunt and a ceremonial trek to a wooded knoll south of town. Gobbler's Knob, so named for its turkey roosting past, would be the stage. In 1887, the first official Groundhog Day was held there, with a committee that styled itself the Groundhog Club. By the end of the decade, the town's groundhog had a dignified name, Phil. The origin story of that name is deliciously murky. Some say it honored a certain King Philip, others that it just worked in headlines. But by the 20th century, Punxsutawney Phil was the star. and the club's members had upgraded into an inner circle, complete with tuxedos and top hats. American ritual loves a costume change. The ceremony became fancier as railroads, then cars, then television moved audiences within reach. The inner circle speaks with ceremonial bravado about Groundhog, the special language Phil allegedly uses to communicate which scroll to read. 2 ornate scrolls are ready, one promising an early spring and one predicting more winter. A handler, these days the club's president, lanes into the burrow. Phil whispers in his ear, and a proclamation follows. The act is delightfully theatrical and irresistibly shareable. It is also done in pre-dawn dark, under so many floodlights, that the concept of an honest solar shadow has left the building. Nobody minds. The ritual now lives in its own ecosystem, where thousands chant a rodent's name in winter coats at 6:30 a.m., and countless more stream the verdict from bed. One reason it all stuck like a burr vest is that groundhogs are, no exaggeration, elite-level hibernators, and the human brain loves a good mismatch. A sleepy creature as a weather professional. Groundhogs are in the squirrel family, Siridae, kin to marmots and prairie dogs. Adults typically stretch 16 to 27 inches nose to tail tip and weigh 5 to 14 pounds, heavier in late summer after months of frantic foraging. In spring and summer, they are lawn ruining, vegetable patch haunting tunnel engineers. A burrow can run 30 feet or more, with multiple entrances, chambers for sleeping, and even a latrine corner. In fall, biology flips the switch. The animal enters true hibernation, not the light nap of a bear. Body temperature can plunge from around 98 degrees Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Celsius, to as low as 37 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. Heart rate slows from something like 80 beats per minute to 5 or even less. Breathing drops to a handful of breaths per minute. They lose a significant percentage of body mass and fuel their metabolism by burning white and brown fat, especially a specialized tissue that serves as an internal space heater during periodic arousals. They are not dead, though it can look that way. Every couple of weeks, they shiver themselves back up to operational temperature for a day, often to maintain physiological balance, then sink down again. When folklorists describe midwinter animals turning or changing, this is the raw material behind those words. That physiology bends reality in Phil's favor in one perfectly sly way. In much of Pennsylvania, wild male groundhogs do sometimes stir in early February, surfacing briefly to check routes and sniff out the neighborhood before breeding season. Penn State Extension has noted that males often appear in February before females emerge later. They rarely deliver weather bulletins, but they do literally pop out of the ground in the dead of winter. Folklore was paying attention. Science did not come here to be impressed by a marmot with a resume. When climatologists actually compare Phil's pronouncements with subsequent temperatures, the romance wilts in the fluorescent light. NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, in multiple summaries over the last decade, has consistently found that Phil hovers well south of 50% accuracy. NEST 2020 and 2020 and 23 rundowns peg his success rate at around 39 to 40% when matched against national temperature outcomes in the weeks following the big day. The Storm Facts Almanac, which has maintained a meticulous list of Phil's calls since 1887, lands in similar territory. Stormfax also tallies his preferences, which show a heavy bias toward more winter. By their count, through recent years, Phil has predicted more winter, roughly 85% of the time, and called for an early spring only a couple dozen times, with several years missing records. In other words, he is the friend who always says the party will get rained out. Eventually, he is right. The equinox on March 20th or 21 does the heavy lifting anyway. From February 2nd to the equinox is about 6 to 7 weeks by definition, which makes 6 more weeks of winter, functionally a calendar flex. Belief doesn't really enter it. A ritual can be knowing and still be potent. People in Punxsutawney do not pretend fill drafts 500 millibar height anomalies. They lean into the drama because it is midwinter and everybody wants a story, and Punxsutawney told it with unstoppable hustle. By the 1920s and 30s, radio and regional newsreel cameras were making Gobbler's Knob a seasonal dateline. The club cultivated its brand with flourishes. Phil lives, in off hours, in a custom enclosure called Phil's Burrow in the Punxsutawney Memorial Library complex in Barclay Square, a small glass-fronted habitat where locals and visitors can watch him nap like a celebrity in a very small penthouse. He has a mate, often named Phyllis, because even weather prophets require a social life, and because alliteration sells t-shirts. Then 1993 happened. Columbia Pictures released a comedy directed by Harold Ramis and written by Danny Rubin called Groundhog Day on February 12th. Bill Murray played a sardonic Pittsburgh weatherman sent to Punxsutawney to cover the holiday, only to become trapped in a time loop, reliving the day endlessly. The movie's production had scouted Punxsutawney, but ultimately shot the town scenes in Woodstock, Illinois, for logistical reasons. None of that mattered on impact. The film turned Groundhog Day from a regionally famous quirk into a cultural metaphor. The holiday went from a seasonal curiosity to a phrase. Soldiers in Iraq described the numbing repetition of daily patrols as Groundhog Day. Politicians used it when Congress rehearsed the same debates. Monotony got a mascot, and it wore whiskers. Attendance in Punxsutawney surged. Estimates vary, because counting a milling crowd is a dark art. But in the film's afterglow, the town reported tens of thousands, with particularly big years climbing past 20,000, and some brags of 30,000 plus. In weaker weather or budget years, crowds shrink to the low thousands. The point is not the exact figure. The point is that Hollywood screenplay made a rodent a global celebrity. As the holiday went macro, other towns upped their groundhog game. The Staten Island Zoo's Chuck became a New York media staple in 1981. In recent years, the zoo has referred to him as Staten Island Chuck, with some seasons starring a female stand-in named Charlotte. In 2014, a drop by then Mayor Bill de Blasio during the photo op created days of bad headlines and later reports that the groundhog died a week afterward. With questions swirling around the cause, the zoo said there was no clear link between the fall and the death. The New York media said controversy sells. In Canada, Wired, Wharton, Ontario, staged Wharton, Willie starting in 1956, after a local prankster named Mac Mackenzie lured the press with a fabricated groundhog festival, and then doubled down with gusto. The town adopted an albino groundhog as a mascot in later years, adding visual flair and a sudden demand for speff. There have been moments of gallows humor, such as the time in 1999 when an official Willie died before showtime and was replaced in a public viewing with a mummified placeholder in a tiny tuxedo, a storyline that tabloid editors still hug in their sleep. Shubenacadie Sam, in Nova Scotia, makes an earlier call thanks to Atlantic time and, perhaps, a firmer grip on coffee. General Beauregard Lee in Georgia claims startlingly high accuracy numbers, a confidence game as old as the almanac. Animal rights groups have taken up the cause as well. Petter has argued that the ritual stresses a hibernator and proposed a robotic Phil in 2010, a cyborg future that the Groundhog Club politely declined. Municipal police departments sometimes play along, issuing mock warrants for Phil after late-season blizzards. An Ohio prosecutor in 2013 even drafted a satirical indictment for misrepresentation of spring, which the inner circle pardoned with the stern dignity of men in top hats who know their marmot is above the law. The broader ecosystem of jokes and jabs proves the real point. The holiday works because it is unserious about a serious season. Winter will happen. So will shadow theatre. Under the comedy lives a fossil of folk sense. Early farmers did not need a rodent when they could read the sky. Candlemas lore encoded a pattern. Clear midwinter days form under stable, cold, high pressure, the kind that keeps a chill locked in. Cloudy days ride in with Gulf or Atlantic moisture, often ahead of milder, messy weather. To put it another way, a blue sky February 2nd meant another way. A blue sky February 2nd meant another hard freeze, likely hung around. A low, iron sky offered at least the short-term promise of moderation. Groundhog Day distills that logic into a single furry press conference. The meteorological signal is weak if anyone starts wagering on March temperatures from a single date. Climate trends, ocean patterns like El Niño or La Niña, and sheer weather chaos swamp any Candlemas clarity. Long-range forecasting uses probabilities, not marmots, yet the rhyme hangs around because the climate sense remains legible in the bones. Every piece of this story attracts myth, and they deserve a friendly audit. The Roman Lupercalia theory feels satisfying and hovers over many popular write-ups, but historians of the calendar wave it off as more story logic than documented lineage. In bulk, the Gaelic seasonal festival, on or around February 1st, associated with the goddess Brigid and, later, Saint Brigid, also stands nearby on the wheel of the year. In Scottish Gaelic vernacular, there is a traditional rhyme about a serpent emerging from its hole on Brigid's Day. These are resonant neighbours. Direct parentage is a bridge too far. The clearest, best documented pipeline into today's rodent ritual runs through Christian Candlemas and German-speaking immigrants in Pennsylvania, with a cameo from rural weather proverbs, then a 19th century editor's promotional instincts, then a 20th century film's myth-making power. The badger did not die for this. He was simply replaced by a newcomer that the Lenape neighbours had already named, and the colonial settlers already named, and that colonial settlers already knew how to roast. That culinary note is not a cheap shot. It is history. Groundhog meat shows up in accounts from the 18th and 19th centuries as a not infrequent ingredient. Pennsylvania German communities even developed a daylight saving time take on the feast, with picnics later in the year celebrating Phil's health and dispensing a jokey elixir of life, said to add years to the prophet's lifespan. The Groundhog Club today claims Phil is the same animal who has been predicting since 1887, thanks to these magic elixirs administered at the annual picnic. Biologists smile and scratch their heads. In the wild, groundhogs tend to live 3-6 years. In captivity, a careful handled animal might push a decade. A single imperial groundhog enduring for 130 plus years belongs to the same genre as the Loch Ness Monster, though it inspires less tabloid sprinting. Nature's version of Phil is less immortal and more interesting. Woodchucks are burrow landlords with impressive zoning. A home system can feature a main den with a grass-lined sleeping chamber and separate bolt holes for quick exits and summer annexes for breezy naps away from the damp below. They do solid civil engineering, including drainage, and a closet they use as a bathroom. The structure can run to 45 feet or more in a rambling property line. They are also surprisingly strict suburbanites. They maintain boundaries with scent and occasional chases, males courting females in late winter and early spring, and becoming fathers to 2 to 6 pups born after a roughly 31 to 32-day gestation. Babies emerge above ground after 6 to 7 weeks, looking like uncertain baked potatoes. By autumn, the cycle restarts. Fat stores pile up, breathing slows, and the pulse in a wintering groundhog drops to the tempo of a metronome in a museum. The holiday takes that very real ecological clock and pins it to human rituals built out of winter boredom and entrepreneurial flair. Punxsutawney's Inner Circle stages a multi-day celebration around Groundhog Day, layering banquet, polka, dances, fireworks, and early morning transport to the knob. In many years, crowds spill around the little stage in Parker's as a host hypes anticipation like a sports announcer. In 2021, the pandemic forced a virtual ceremony with no in-person crowd, which did not stop the streaming audience from spiking. The town long ago learned how to build an off-season economy on a very specific piece of whimsy. It sells shirts, mugs, top hat pins, and Phil plush. It maintains a website and a press list. It keeps Phil publicly visible year-round at the library habitat, where a sign politely reminds visitors not to tap on the glass. The entire enterprise runs like a cheerful small-town theme park, where the only ride is winter ending, slowly, every single time. The people who trace the story with footnotes, rather than footprints, have names, and they are indispensable to the fun. Don Yoder, the late University of Pennsylvania folklorist and champion of Pennsylvania German culture, wrote at length about Grunzow lodges and the syncretic traditions that formed Groundhog Day. The Library of Congress's American Folklife Center has published pieces connecting Candlemas, German badger lore, and the American adaptation. NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information has run accessible, nicely caveated analyses of Phil's accuracy versus observed accuracy versus observed temperatures. Penn State Extension Man's The Pragmatic Side, explaining when and why groundhogs emerge and how to share a yard with one without losing a vegetable garden to open-plan dining. Smithsonian Magazine and historical societies have kept the 1841 Berks County Diary, quote, in circulation, a satisfying primary source that says, the quiet part out loud. Germans in Pennsylvania were absolutely saying this thing in the 1840s. The holiday also has a durable international footprint that never asks for a US passport stamp. In Serbia and parts of the Balkans, the Bears' Day on, or near Candlemas, survives as its own animal check-in, tied to Strettinger, the presentation of the Lord. On the Julian calendar, some Romanian villages mark Ziua Ursului, the Day of the Bear, watching for omens in the animal's behavior. In England, conservation groups now nod back to an older Hedgehog Day on February 2nd to promote a modern cause, saving a species in decline. Germany still keeps the Candlemas proverbs, though the animal actors today are more likely to be domestic cats than wandering badgers. The weather-law continent feels smaller than it did when farmers moved by ox and wagon, but a shared superstition remains a community without borders. Groundhog Day refuses to tidy itself up for purists. It is not wholly ancient. It is not wholly new. It is not scientific. And it is not completely foolish. It sits on a line calibrated in human emotions, fear of famine in a cold climate, hope stoked by the calendar, delight in a public party that interrupts winter monotony. and the sheer comedy of asking a somnolent rodent to endorse a forecast. There is something disarmingly democratic about it. Every kid in a heavy coat can understand the rule. Every adult knows the outcome does not really settle anything. The experiment repeats annually with complete confidence and zero pressure. That is the other reason the holiday has taken on a second career as a metaphor. Danny Rubin's original concept for the 1993 film tapped into eternal return motifs that philosophers and theologians can debate until the next ice age, but audiences zeroed in on something quieter and more universal. The day repeats until its star learns to be a better version of himself under pressure. Groundhog Day, as a phrase, became shorthand for the trapped feeling of repetitive tasks and the faint optimism that a change in heart and habit might eventually break the cycle. The little town that had spent a century making a living from a silly ritual woke up to find its brand now laced into philosophy classes and war dispatches. In 2006, the film was selected for preservation by the Library of Congress in the National Film Registry as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. A holiday invented for midwinter marketing had gone mythic. Nothing about the day is static. The rituals inside it are always tinkered with. The inner circle's titles evolve like nicknames in a bar league. The town polishes new slogans. Weather organizations publish fresh accuracy scorecards because keeping score is what humans do when faced with nonsense. Groundhog Day just shrugs and rolls on. It even absorbs scandal. Reporters occasionally press the inner circle on how exactly a marmot whispers in Groundhog. Exactly a marmot whispers in Groundhog Ace over the roar of a crowd and a 5-piece poker band. The smiling answer is that magic elixir lasts 7 years, and Phil speaks when it counts. Reporters occasionally point out that sunrise over Punxsutawney in early February comes after the most boisterous part of the ceremony, so the entire notion of shadow sighting is theatrical. The smiling answer is that anticipation requires stage lights. Physics does not need to show up at every party. The good news for people allergic to pure kitsch is that the animal part of the spectacle remains an educational moment in disguise. A hibernator this extreme is a miracle of metabolic adaptation. Researchers have taken what groundhogs do naturally and asked interesting questions about organ preservation, clotting and heart function in states of reduced metabolic demand. Nature became a lab. Penn State students learn that wild males' early February wanderings are not prognostications, but pre-mating reconnaissance. Wildlife educators explain how to harden a garden perimeter to let woodchucks go around instead of through. Suburban homeowners learn that if a burrow shares space with porches and sheds, the removal plan needs to avoid orphaning pups in spring. All of this knowledge sneaks into public conversation because everyone knows a day on the calendar that opens the door. The sleepy part of the holiday soul never goes away. People wake in the dark to drive to a hill to watch a creature whose heart rate spent the night in single digits. That inversion is the mood. The animal is quiet and bewildered. The humans are loud and delighted. Once the pronouncement is made, everyone disperses into the late dawn, back to jobs, classrooms, home kitchens, and the next weather system. The rest of February happens. The holiday leaves behind a sense memory of cold air, brass band music, and the faint smell of coffee in paper cups. And about 6 weeks later, give or take, the light changes, buds appear, and spring shows up under its own steam. Always more dramatic in memory than in math. There is one final sleight of hand inside the tradition that deserves a small round of applause. The 6-week window is a trick. From February 2nd to mid-March is always going to feel like forever, no matter what a groundhog says. because that is when winter is running out the clock. The holiday pretends that Phil takes the measure of this and decides. The truth is that the physics of the Earth's orbit has already decided. The crowd adores the lie because it is better theatre than axial tilt. Meteorologists roll their eyes and also smile because everyone at Gobbler's Knob is already half in love with the sky, whether they understand 500 millibar flow or not. A calendar-only party about the end of winter would feel thin. A calendar party with a marmot and a brass band is irresistible. Punxsutawney has turned that irrepressibility into a civic identity. The town name, often said to derive from a Lenape word, sometimes glossed as town of sandflies, now conjures a place that leaned into a joke and never let go. The inner circle preserves the rhythm, with a ritualist's zeal and a marketer's wink. Phil lives in a glass-fronted burrow at the library as the most watched resident in town history. Families walk past to wave at an animal that would rather nap. Locals can recite the proclamation formula by heart. News anchors in Los Angeles pronounce Punxsutawney with confidence, one day a year, then put the syllables away with the snow boots. That is how tradition works in a modern media landscape. It is simple. It is strange. It travels well. The record dutifully kept by fans includes drought, years, and deluge years. In 1943, newspapers report no public ceremony due to World War II constraints, though Phil's memory absorbed other wartime stories to keep the narrative alive. In 1958, Phil allegedly warned of a long winter that turned out mild in the statistical bins. In El Niño years and La Niña years, Phil makes the same check-in. NOAA releases maps. The inner circle releases a marmot. Analysts merge Phil's call with national anomalies and politely remind everyone that a marmot is not a pressure pattern. The ritual repeats and refuels. The film ripples continue to refract. In odd places, Buddhist scholars and Jesuit priests have both used the movie as a teaching tool, treating it as an allegory for spiritual progress or moral formation. Fans make pilgrimages not only to Punxsutawney, but also to Woodstock, Illinois, to see the shooting locations, as if that might help get unstuck from their own loops. The term Groundhog Day appears in the New York Times, in congressional hearings, in pop songs, and in the grumbling undercurrent inside any office where the copier breaks on a schedule as precise as the lunar phases. The holiday's prey coattails could carry a 6-foot iguana. Fortunately, they only have to carry a stout rodent who sleeps most of the time and wakes up photogenic. A handful of myths still beg for friendly correction, and Groundhog Day history cheerfully supplies it. The groundhog is not anywhere near the accuracy champion of his guild. Despite claims from rival towns, whose press releases read like the bio line of a very confident contestant on a reality show. Self-reported numbers for groundhogs across North America trend thrillingly high. Independent checks hold them back to earth. The entire premise is light-hearted and low stakes. The Weather Service, for those who want odds with data, publishes seasonal outlooks based on oceanic and atmospheric indicators updated at least monthly. Groundhog Day runs on the same schedule every year and asks no follow-up. The holiday was not invented by Native Americans or colonists in the 1600s. It congealed into its modern American form late in the 19th century with hobbyist zeal, newspaper ink, and small-town showmanship. The town's groundhog is not actually 137 years old unless he has found the elixir of life behind the circulation desk. And Punxsutawney is not some ancient druidic site with secret solstice alignments. It is a hill with a stage, floodlights, and a ticketed shuttle bus. Everything else is true in the way good folklore is true. The date matters because the sun angle matters. The law matters because memory needs a hook. The animals matter because humans empathize with other mammals who sleep through stress. The dialect societies matter because a winter festival is a lively way to cement language and community on an immigrant timeline. And the weather matters because it always matters. When Pennsylvanians in the 1840s echoed their German grandparents and opened the door on Candlemas to see if the day was bright or grey, they were not playing for cable news hits. They were reading the sky and telling themselves a story to get through the next 40 nights. The Groundhog Day file keeps expanding. New fans stumble into it through memes and live streams. New controversies sparkle and fade. New think pieces connected to climate anxiety, because modern times can turn anything into a canvas for worry. New kids grow up in towns where February 2nd means free donuts and school bus detours. The inner circle handshakes new members into service with a wink. The town paints new murals of Phil in sunglasses and scarves. Historical societies keep finding 19th century clippings in yellowed folders. Everyone gets exactly what they came for. People who want roots find Candlemas. People who want a laugh find a top hat and a marmot. People who want the smell of early spring find it somewhere in late March while shrugging at a forecast that lived in a scroll and a spotlight. The strangest trick of all is that the holiday takes a nap and comes back fresh every year, exactly like its star. There is no fatigue. The joke resets because winter always does, and communities crave a way to count that down together. The act of standing in the cold to hear a comfortingly familiar sentence audibly warms the crowd. That feeling is older than the rite, and more durable than any data point. It is the feeling of civilization itself, in rough weather, telling a story around a stump that a spring is coming. The words change, the costumes evolve, the groundhogs rotate through their little glass apartment, and Phil allegedly sips elixir under the approving gaze of a librarian. The next February 2nd snaps into the calendar, the way it always has. A dawn crowd appears. A handler holds up a drowsy meteorologist with one hand under the chest and one under the rump. The proclamation rolls. A marmot blinks in surprise at his own fame. Music plays. The crowd melts away into bitter air. Winter keeps happening, then stops. It is ridiculous. It is charming. It is perfectly American in its marketing and perfectly human in its hope. It is a day when a creature built for sleep becomes the center of a spectacle built for patience. The record of it, from the 1841 diary through Climber Freeze's 1886 boosterism, from Polish lantern Candlemas echoes to Noah spreadsheets, from Wyatton's snow stage improvisations to Staten Island's tabloid mishaps, marks it as a tradition with more grip than logic. That is the fun. The logic is handled by axial tilt and atmospheric circulation. The grip is handled by Phil, and the crip is handled by Phil and the 1,000 people who set alarms for 3:30 a.m. in February because they believe in parties, not prophecies. The calendar creeps, the hibernator sleeps, and Groundhog Day wakes up on time, every time. Moving on, our next tale is titled The Social Structure of the Gupta Empire. Everyone loves a golden age until the fine print shows up. The Gupta Empire in northern India, roughly 320 to 550 say, looks radiant from a distance. Gold coins glittering with gods and kings, poets dropping metaphors like mic drops, temples rising with precision-engineered stone. Step closer, and the shine gets more complicated. The social structure hums like a well-tuned machine for the elites and grinds like a millstone for everyone, powering it. That friction never makes the tourist brochure. It does, however, make the story. Start with the vibe. Picture the Ganga Plains, after centuries of churn. The Mauryas long gone, the cushions fading, small kings everywhere like confetti. Then, around 319, 320 C, a new calendar era launches. The Gupta era, and a compact dynasty with a serious brand strategy takes the stage. Chandragupta holds the first big spotlight. His son Samudragupta rockets the family name into the Pan-Indian Hall of Fame. By the reign of Chandragupta to Vikramaditya, around 375-415 sec, Gupta coins and inscriptions announce a universe with order, Sanskrit poetry, and a Garuda crest flexing on everything. The state promises dharma, prosperity, and a stable grid of power. That grid runs on a very specific hierarchy. Imagine the pyramid. At the top, the king is Maharajadhiraja, the great king over great kings. Samudragupta gets celebrated in the Allahabad Pillar inscription, composed by his court poet Harishana in flawless Sanskrit, for conquering or subduing dozens of rulers, forest chiefs, frontier kings, southern monarchs, and then playing the veena on his coins like a one-man prayer. Campaign for divine kingship. He performs the Ashvametha, sacrifice, and mints commemorative coins of it. Not subtle. Right below him clusters the court. Kumaramatyas, Sandivigrahikas, Mahadandaniyakas, princes, ministers for peace and war, commanders of armies, provinces called Bhuktis, get run by governors, districts called Vishyas by Vishya parties, and revenue paperwork multiplies with more energy than a modern office copier before a deadline. The bureaucracy speaks Sanskrit now. That matters socially more than any victory parade. The Guptas preside over what later scholars call the Sanskritization of power. Earlier dynasts, like the Satavahanas, liked Prakrit for inscriptions. Under the Guptas, the epigraphic world flips. Suddenly, copperplate land grants in eastern India sing in polished caviar-style Sanskrit, skeptical about how culture builds hierarchy. Watch Sanskrit turn from literary language into an access card for political and priestly prestige. If someone recited the right verses and traced the right gotra, doors opened. That is how a language becomes a social escalator. The formal story of society looks clean on paper. 4 varnas, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras, with dharma prescriptions signed off by law books, like the Manusamriti and the Yajnavalkya. Smriti, Brahmins chant the Vedas and accept land grants. Kshatriyas fight and rule. Vaishyas trade and farm. Shudras serve. Then the paperwork meets reality and explodes into thousands of occupational and kin-based jatis, each with its own customs, rituals, and neighborhood clout. Weaver guilds, goldsmith collectives, caravan leaders, oil pressers, potters, boatmen, scribes. Social life moves in these compact clubs. They marry within, police behavior with their own mini-bylaws, and donate as a group to temples or monasteries when they feel flush. Varna talks ideals. Jati runs logistics. Brahmins sit at the control room of ritual and legitimacy. Land grants to Brahmins, and temples become the empire's favorite method of political networking. The charters are where social structure goes from theory to practice. Copper plates from places like Damadapa in Pundravardhana Bhukti. Now, northern Bangladesh record kings and governors, endowing villages to learned Brahmins with a list of privileges that reads like the deluxe VIP package. Freedom from most royal taxes, immunity from the entry of royal officers, the right to collect fines and fees within the donated boundaries, control over waste and fallow land, sometimes even rights over hidden treasure, and deposits found in the soil. The wording sparkles with Sanskrit verses, and then, suddenly, it turns legalistic and sharp. That shift shows the spine of the social order. A decentralized grid of local powers locked in through sacred status and economic rights. This model has a second engine, the guild system. Sharenas, corporate bodies of artisans, merchants, and bankers, form a social backbone in cities and market towns. They are not chatty hobby clubs. They regulate quality, set prices, lend money, and sponsor temples. Inscriptions document their reach. The Mandsaur inscriptions from 437 and 473 describe a guild of silk weavers that migrated from Gujarat to the Malwa region and endowed a sun temple, funding its maintenance through interest on loans. Translation for social structure. Wealth moves in cohesive urban groups, not just royal treasuries. Guild leaders such as Shrestins, bankers, and Sarthavahas, caravan chiefs, hold social clout that rivals minor nobles. When the empire wants to keep the trade arteries pulsing, from Ujjain's markets to the Bay of Bengal ports like Tamarlipti, these guilds become indispensable. The Kshatriya tier looks glamorous and bloody. The Guptas position themselves as model Kshatriyas, protectors of Dharma, patrons of Vedic rituals, but also connoisseurs of high culture. Samudragupta's Veena coin, says soldier, scholar, artist, in a single strike of gold. Chandragupta II's archetype shows a king as cosmic regulator, strong arms, stable state. Below them are feudatories and frontier lords, often titled Mahasamantas. Some owe military service, some govern rough edges with a wink and tribute arrangement. The Allahabad inscription lists Atavika rulers, forest chiefs who submit and pay. Translated socially, the center co-ops peripheral elites and lets them run their micro-worlds as long as they send cash, troops, and public respect. Vaishyas fill the gap between royal ideology and tea in the bizarre reality. Trade routes feed cities like Pataliputra, Ujjain, Mathura, and Prayaga. West coast ports such as Bharukacha, modern Broach, had spent centuries in long-distance commerce. By Gupta times, maritime links to Southeast Asia look busier than links to Rome. The Roman gold inflow that boosted earlier Indian economies slows, but Gupta gold dinars keep humming. Elegant coins roughly 7.5 to 8 grams of near-pure gold, depicting kings as archers, lion slayers, or horse sacrifices, with Sanskrit legends and the ubiquitous Garuda. Those coins are social signals. They shout that the urban money economy matters, that coins travel where state writ and Sanskrit culture want to go, and that a merchant with capital can be as politically relevant as a minor Raja when it comes time to fund a temple or a festival. Shudras and peasants carry the heaviest load. The land yields the revenue. The village organizes the labor. The Gupta revenue vocabulary tells a chapter of the story in a string of sharp nouns. Bhaga, the royal share of produce. Kara and uparakara, taxes and cesses. Bhoga, supplies due to officials. And the dreaded Vrishti, forced labor, or corvée, which epigraphs explicitly mention when they exempt a Dane village from it. Vrishti is the social line between okay and oppressive. When a copper plate proclaims that a Brahmin's new Agrahara village need not send porters for royal errands or labor for road building, it means other villages still must. That explains peasant politics. A village that wins exemption celebrates like it hit a tax holiday. A village without it keeps lugging the baggage of empire. The police and justice scene runs through a lens provided by a foreigner. The Chinese Buddhist monk Faxian travels across northern India, around 399, 414. He walks through Pataliputra, Mathura, and Tamralipti, and records what he sees. He says crime is rare, travel is safe, and the state does not use harsh punishments. There are fines rather than mutilations or executions. That line gets quoted every time someone wants the Gupta period to sound like a utopia with good lighting. Then reality taps the shoulder. Other inscriptions and law books confirm a legal culture with fines and a preference for arbitration. They also confirm that judges exist, disputes happen, and social life is far from frictionless. Haxian notices something else with clinical clarity. The Chandalas, communities marked as untouchable, live outside city gates, sound wooden clappers when entering town, and carry out tasks like disposing of corpses and animal remains. That detail sits like a blunt instrument in the social hierarchy. Compassionate rhetoric in circulation at the royal court coexists with real enforced ostracism at the margins. Untouchability appears not as an unfortunate footnote, but as a social rule codified by Dharma Sastras and practiced in urban daily life. Texts like the Manasamriti outline hierarchies of pollution with unblinking precision, and Gupta-era society performs those rules on the ground. The presence of cremation grounds never far from city walls, the logic of ritual purity at wells and temples, the habit of ringing a clapper to announce bodily proximity. These make caste discrimination part of the choreography of streets. That choreography has room for nuance, migration, occupational success, and clever alliances. It never stops being a boundary-making dance. Women live inside this lattice of status, law, and ritual, with a spectrum of experiences that dodges easy platitudes. Legal texts of the era, especially the Yajnavalkya Smriti, likely early Gupta, recognize stridana, women's own property, typically gifts received at marriage or from parents and relatives. A widow could inherit in certain circumstances, especially if there were no sons. And these debates show up in law digests and in judicial practice. Elite women appear in inscriptions as donors and influencers. Consider Prabhavati Gupta, daughter of Chandragupta II, who marries into the Vakataka dynasty and rules as regent in central India around 420 C. Leaving inscriptions at Rantek, she signs grants as a devout Vaishnavite and a political operator. The evidence scales down too. Artisan women appear in guild contexts. Nuns and Buddhist lay women surface in monastic donor lists. Courtesans, or Ganikas, show up in epigraphy and literature, as well-educated cultural players. That looks progressive until the next inscription slaps down reality. An inscription at Erin, dated to 510 C in the reign of Bhanagupta, records one of the earliest sati stones, a wife following her husband on his funeral pyre. The practice is not widespread at this time, and scholars debate its reach, but as a cultural signal, it announces a brutal edge to idealized female devotion. Marriage is mostly patrilocal and firmly cast in the grammar of caste. Hypergamy gets social oxygen. Higher status men marrying lower status women. Marrying lower status women is normatively tolerable. Reverse unions are anathematized in most legal texts. Elite households trend to early marriage for girls by later Gupta times, a practice urged by Brahmanical prescriptives, though the exact ages are debated and regionally varied. Urban literature relashes witty courtesans and wry heroines. Village life pens women into cycles of labor, ritual, and maternity, with local deities absorbing maternal anxieties better than any court poet ever did. Education concentrates power like a magnet. The Gupta court turns Sanskrit into an elite handshake. Grammar, logic, law, astronomy, and poetics bind Brahmin teachers to Kshatriya patrons. Astronomers like Aryabhata, born in 476 C, composed the Aryabhatiya in 499 C, placing the length of the solar year at about 365.358 days, and describing the rotation of the Earth on its axis, all in crystalline Sanskrit verse that only trained students can fully decode. That's not just science. It's a social filter. Knowledge travels through ashramas and gurukulas. The ladder to high study is built for boys from elite lineages. Monastic universities grow on the scene as well. Nalanda becomes a major center a bit later, flourishing from the 5th, 6th centuries onward, under post-Gupta patrons, offering another channel for literate prestige, especially among Buddhists, but the sociological pattern holds. Literacy is a privilege. Sanskrit fluency doubles it. Religion provides a cross-braced scaffolding for social order. Gupta courts radiate Vaishnavism, with Garuda as the imperial emblem. Temples to Vishnu and the sun receive lavish gifts. Brahmins perform household and state rituals, prescribe life cycle ceremonies that glue individual identity to caste and clan, and interpret the Dharma texts that justify the whole arrangement. That does not erase pluralism. Buddhism remains influential in cities and along trade routes. Jain communities sponsor temples. Shaiva worship gets serious artistic backing in places like Udayagiri, where inscriptions and rock-cut shrines from the early 5th century show royal patronage. Every donation inscription reads like a mini census of social life. Names, gotras, titles, and the exact cesses remitted decorate the stone, teaching who can give, what they give, who receives it, and which taxes vanish in a puff of Sanskrit when the king nods. The donor list, a banker here, a goldsmith there, a caravan chief, a guild of silk weavers, snaps into focus the vertical layers and horizontal networks that actually deliver temple lamps on time and priests their lunch. Urban life struts, while village life sweats. In Ujjain, the smell of cardamom and sesame oil wafts from market lanes. Bankers deal in credit notes and interest rates that would make a modern spreadsheet blush. 12% annually is not rare in epigraphic endowments. Caravan bells jingle. Carts creak with textiles and salt. The city has guild halls where disputes are settled and apprentices learn craft secrets. Public infrastructure exists on a realistic scale. Stepwells, tanks, and roads get built and maintained, often as pious works funded through interest-bearing endowments. The same economics would look less charming in a wheat field. Tax assessors calculate the royal share of barley. The village assembly bargains, negotiates, and sometimes pleads. Forced labor for road repair or official travel falls on the least powerful shoulders. One copper plate ending with a breezy clause, stating that the donated land shall be enjoyed along with the rights to mines and hidden treasure, stands as a one-line seminar in property and power. Administration keeps the engine running. Provinces, districts, sub-districts, officers with titles that read like alphabet soup. Uparakas, provincial governors. Vishyapis, district heads. Ayuktas, executive officers. Dandanayakas, military or police. Village heads called gramakas or pramakas, elders known as mahataras, and landlords called kutumbins. All appear in inscriptions as decision-makers. When a land grant happens, the charter is read aloud to these officials, and the vassal elite gets the memo. The legal fiction declares the Dunays immunity from interference by the king's men. That line deserves emphasis. Power in the Gupta age, often takes the form of power not to be bothered. Immunity is the coin of social privilege, and it circulates faster in Sanskrit than in Bali. Feudalism becomes the elephant in every Gupta seminar. Some historians once painted the era as the rise of Indian feudalism. Land for service deals, military lords, ever-increasing local autonomy, peasants tied to land. Others rolled their eyes. The guild economy is robust, trade is lively, and the empire's coins glitter. This is no twilight of towns. The inscriptional record plays referee. It shows strong urban guilds, dutiful accountants, and a central authority, handing out real powers to Brahmins and temples far from the royal capital. A middle way emerges. The Guptas stitch together a multi-centered order where prestige and power are outsourced to controlled allies. That is not quite feudalism. It is a high-trust network with land as the main currency and Sanskrit as its legalese. The network thrives while the center stays strong. It starts fraying when new costs hit. Costs hit hard in the later 5th century. Skandagupta, ruling around 455–467 C, boasts in the Bitari pillar inscription of repelling the Pushyamithras and the Hunas. His Junagadh rock inscription in Saurashtra narrates the repair of the ancient Sudarshana lake by the governor Parnadatta and his son Chakrapalita. A public works flex with administrative names and dates that scream spreadsheet energy. Victory and infrastructure are expensive. The gold coinage of later Guptas shrinks in purity. Land grants expand in number. Local lords and Brahmin villages grow in autonomy and confidence. The social order leans further into local hands, creating micro-sovereignties that feel terrific for the recipients and quietly starve the treasury. The line between Kshatriya glory and merchant muscle stays porous. Court poets celebrate conquest. Guilds bankroll temples. The Mandsaur silk weavers write themselves into stone as civic benefactors. They document their move from Lata, southern Gujarat, to Dashapura, Mandasda, and record endowments to pay for temple maintenance via the interest on capital sums. The names of guild officers and their rules go on record. That is middle-class power before the phrase existed. It is also caste power, because the guild is an exclusive group and the craft an inherited skill set, guarded against outsiders through ritual and regulation. Beyond the city gates, tribal polities, called Atavikas in the Allahabad Prashasti, live at the edge of this Sanskrit cosmopolis. They are not outside history. They are annexed into it through tribute, hostages, and occasional glory by proximity in royal panegyrics. The imperial record lists them for a reason. Frontier chiefs know the empire's language of gifts and threats. The empire knows their forests and the revenue they represent. Cultural translation happens along these borders. Brahmins carry sacrificial fire and genealogies into new clearings. Villagers adopt new deities with Sanskrit names. Older cults trade appellations and rituals and weave themselves into the imperial cloth. The result looks like unity from the palace roof. At ground level, it sounds like 100 dialects singing the same hymn with different accents. In the home, patriarchy writes the rules and then writes the commentary. Castes police marriage. Property passes through male lines. Women's names in inscriptions appear as donors, but almost always in connection with a male relative whose prestige umbrellas the gift. That pattern makes the outliers shine. Prabhavata rules as regent. A nun sponsors a relic. Sanctum. A courtesan funds a tank. These glints do not cancel the rest. Domestic labor structures the economy. Women's ritual roles structure domestic time. Supposedly universal virtues like chastity obedience, and modesty get dressed up in caviar, with silky metaphors, and then enforced in courtyards with watchful eyes. Literature compensates with iconic heroines and witty apsaras who float above the rules. The archive, implacable as granite, puts them back in. Slavery crops up, but not in plantation form. The legal terminology of Dasa and Darcy speaks to household slaves and debt bonds. Law books like the Narada Smriti and Yajnavalkya. Smriti pass the rights of masters and the limits of sale. In practice, debt bondage and attached labor are common. The same inscriptions that free a Brahmada village from corvée also imply that other, less fortunate communities will do the hauling. Faxian marvels at gentle punishments and honest markets. His silence on slavery does not erase it. Household servants, rural bonded laborers, and ritual specialists at the bottom of the scale, all of them power the machine without their names waking up the stone. Status symbols change with the company. In the palace, kalasha pots of water, conch shells, and white parasols proclaim rank. Queens wear jeweled girdles. Audiences hear poetry from Harishena and, probably, Kalidasa. The famous 9 gems around Vikramaditya is later legend, but the poetic ambience is not. In the village, the symbols shrink and intensify. A Brahmin's topknot and sacred thread signal learning. A guild steward's ring and seal show office. A farmer's ownership of a plough team and right to water from a tank he helped dig means security and standing that chatterers in the capital would never understand. In a cremation ground outside town, a stone with a carved handmark signals a sati. Symbolism cuts both ways. Law reads as literature until it collects a fine. Dharmashastra sets out norms for inheritance, partition, and morality with an air of cosmic calm. Then copper plates and court records bring the thunder. Judges called, Dharmadhikarins arbitrate disputes. Merchant guilds act as quasi-legal bodies to settle commercial cases. Fines have rates, and punishment meets status. Higher caste offenders pay more, lower caste offenders pay hard, and might pay with humiliation rituals. The spectacle of a just king filters through this machinery. The state's loudest message is predictable order. The quietest message is calculated inequality. Cultural life decorates this structural skeleton with star power. Sculptors at places like Sarnath and Mathura create images of Buddha and Hindu deities with uncanny softness of line. Temples at Deogarh and Bittargarh demonstrate brick and stone technology with visual sermons in narrative panels. Sanskrit playwrights refine courtly taste. All that beauty sits on an economic base of labor, transferred from fields to kings, guilds, and temples. A gold coin showing a king offering a libation to Lakshmi is a devotional emoji, and a surplus receipt rolled into one. Food and etiquette enforce hierarchy at the speed of smell. Upper caste households avoid beef with rising fervor. Vegetarian ideals get social zip in Vaishnava and Jain circles. The law books obsess over who can share food, with whom and which vessels get ritually pure treatment. Water sharing rules police caste boundaries faster than any policeman. The chandeliers clapper is not just about movement. It is about culinary borders, pollution rules, and the 1,000 tiny fences that keep a hierarchy alive, even when no one writes a verse about it. The empire's borders wobble. The social structure persists. Hunas push in from the northwest in the mid-5th century. Gupta holds them off. Later kings do not. Political fragmentation accelerates after about 480 C. But the grammar of land grants, guild power, and Varna-Jati discipline replicates under regional dynasties. The Vakatakas in the Deccan, the Matrikas in Saurashtra, the Aulikaras in Malwa, all inherit pieces of the Gupta playbook and annotate them liberally. That continuity is the trick. A great empire falls. The social script it amplified keeps running in smaller theatres. Zoom into a day in Tamralipti, the Bay of Bengal port Faxian, used to sail for Sri Lanka. The wharf clangs with anchors. Merchants speak Magadhi Prakrit with an accent borrowed from ships. Buddhist monks pass with bowls. Brahmins confer in Sanskrit about an upcoming eclipse ritual. A toll collector, called a shulkika, notes goods and collects dues. A caravan chief negotiates storage in a warehouse owned by a bankers' guild. The sense of order arrives not from imperial banners but from routine. Who pays whom? Who gets to touch what? Who cleans which street? A chandala's drumbeat echoes at sundown, reminding everyone that the clean edge of the city is a line only some can cross without washing. Shift to a Brahmedeya village in northern Bengal. Charter issued under Kumaragupta in the 5th century. The copper plates lay it out, line by line, land boundaries by hills, streams, and trees. Taxes exempted with Sanskrit precision. Royal officials barred from entry. Villagers obligated to obey the Dane, or else. The Brahmin recipient's lineage gets spelled out back to a Vedic seer. The village elders nod. They know what just happened. A new power center sprouted, with divine sanction and royal backing. Local peasants will now bring first fruits to a different courtyard. The new calendar era ticked its number toward the mid-400s. Their daily math changed instantly. Class and culture glance at each other and smirk. A Sanskrit inscription might describe a donor as Dakshinatayaga Parayana, devoted to gifts and piety. The same donor builds a tank to water his fields. A king announces Dharma while conscripting villagers for a new road. A merchant bankrolls a sun temple and ensures his caravans at the same time. No one in this story is a caricature. Everyone optimizes. The debate over how urban or rural the Gupta economy was can stretch across a library, but the social snapshot refuses to choose just one background. Cities matter because guilds, coins, and cosmopolitan culture cling to them. Villages matter more because revenue is grain and state power is seasonal. Sanskrit unites elites over long distances. Prakrits and local languages still carry gossip, lullabies, and market haggling. The imperial center models a standard. Regional elites copy it with dialect. Education reproduces the order vertically. Boys from Brahmin families memorize Vedic hymns, prosody, logic. Royal sons learn archery, administration, and enough poetics to flatter poets. Guild apprentices learn their trade at the bench and their social place at the guild hall. Buddhist centers teach scriptures and debate. A scribe class, the Kayastas, appears more and more in records. By the post-Gupta world, it will be a major professional caste with hereditary scribal clout. Every step of learning comes wrapped in ritual, the sacred thread ceremony, the vows of monks, the oath of guild members, because ritual is how society stamps continuity onto a new generation's forehead. Architecture stamps hierarchy onto the landscape. A temple donated by a guild rises on a plinth. Around it cluster shops, stalls, and the houses of priests. Pilgrims arrive on festival days, swelling the town. Donor inscriptions carved on the plinth list names and titles like a carved LinkedIn feed. Everyone who matters gets credited. Everyone who does the physical labor remains unmentioned. That absence is not empty. It is the most eloquent silence in this era. Literature performs elite identity with gleeful craft. Poets like Kalidasa create heroines with luminous eyes and kings who conquer the four quarters with ethical restraint and perfect poetic meters. The audience of those works is self-aware, culturally bilingual, and attuned to the power of Sanskrit to make a world feel inevitable. A wise reader can enjoy the verses and still notice what they conceal: the jati hierarchies that decide who cleans the temple floor, the exemptions that free an agrahara from taxes but bind neighboring villages to deliver butter, grain, and carrying labor for officials, the presence of tribals in an army as pathfinders and archers with no seat at the council fire. Coin imagery reads like a portable constitution. The archetype coin, abundant under Chandragupta II, shows the king with a taut bow and a falcon-like Garuda symbol. The message is unmissable: ordered force, divine sanction. The Tiger Slayer type appears on some issues. Royal virility rendered zoological. Samudragupta's Ashfame the coin parades a sacrificial horse and a queen standing by the Yupa post on the reverse. The queen's presence is social commentary. Women at court legitimate a ritual whose political meaning is territorial sovereignty and wealth. An economy that can freeze this much ideology into 7.5 grams of gold has reached a level of symbolic maturity that eats into the social imagination. Everything here has a source, footnoted, in stone or palm leaf. The Allahabad Pillar Prashasti lists conquered kings and forest chieftains. The Damodarpa copper plates specify taxes and immunities. The Mandasur weavers sing their temple endowment with their own weaverly pride. The Aaron Sati stone etches a tragedy into durable red sandstone. The Junagadha inscription ties governors and engineers to a repaired dam with names and dates that would thrill an auditor. Faxian's record of Buddhist kingdoms describes urban life with curious admiration and a monk's priorities. The law books of Yajnavalkya and Narada distill the expectations of Brahmanical society into crisp aphorisms, masterfully vague, at the exact place where power prefers flexibility. The myth of a uniformly benevolent Gupta age falls apart on contact with this material. The opposite myth of unbroken oppression misses the elasticity and competitiveness in the system. Social mobility exists within controlled channels. A guild can move and maintain its identity. A talented banker's family can capture municipal power over generations. A Brahmin's scholastic prestige can translate into landed wealth and then back into ritual authority. A frontier chief can become a royal feudatory and marry into a Sanskritic world he did not inherit. That dynamism has a ceiling. Chandeliers remain outside the city's touchable core. Most peasants stay tied to land they do not control. Women's autonomy tracks with class and context more than with any general moral progress. Toward the end of the 5th century, external shock meets internal programmability, and the network groans. Skandagupta's later coin issues look thinner, and the ground-level record tells why. The state relied on land grants more than cash taxes when the cost of frontier defense roared. Grants to Brahmins and temples proliferated, in East and Central India especially, chipping away at revenue while locking in local loyalties that kings needed in the short term. The social order, arching over king, priest, soldier, merchant, and peasant, bends to accommodate this, and in bending sets the mold for centuries. Post-Gupta polities inherit not just territory, but the instruction manual. Use Sanskrit, gift land, honor Brahmins, flatter guilds, promise dharma, and keep Vishti flowing from somewhere. The whole structure feels stable because everyone inside it rehearses it constantly. Ritual keeps Brahmins on top and reminds Kshatriyas they need priests more than priests need them. Coinage celebrates power and makes markets. Guild rules teach professional honor. Caste rules teach personal deference. Inscriptions recite the same tropes on purpose, year after year, region after region. The king as ocean of virtues, the donor as pious, the tax exemptions as manifold, the unbroken succession as guaranteed. That repetition is not laziness. It is politics staged as culture. A final turn to the street, where theory gets pragmatic. In an Ujjain lane on a market day, around 400 C, a silk weaver guild officer inspects bolts of cloth. A copper seal dangles from his neck. His guild once migrated from Lata, and their Mandasur inscription stores that memory like a family album. A banker's clerk tallies pledge notes. A Buddhist monk collects alms from shopkeepers. The alms register gets audited by the monastery steward. A Brahmin astrologer reads a royal horoscope with glances at the sun. A Shudra porter shoulders a bale under orders barked by a warehouse man. A Chandala's clapper rattles at the edge. The city hums, because each person knows exactly how far they can go without breaking a line that was drawn before they were born. And then the scene slides upriver to a village assembly outside Pataliputra. Elders and landlords sit. A royal official recites a copper plate, granting a nearby tract to a learned Brahmin. The boundaries mentioned are streams and mango trees. The exemptions listed include Boga, Kara, and Vishti. The official hands over a jar of water as ritual transfer. The Dane recites a verse in Sanskrit about the merits of giving land, equal to giving the earth. A peasant watches the jar and knows that someone else's share of labor just became someone else's entitlement. The order has beauty and bite in the same breath. The social structure of the Gupta Empire breathes through these scenes. Vertically ranked, horizontally networked, publicly pious, privately shrewd. The king's coin and the guild's charter, the Brahmin's mantra and the law book's clause, the porter's back and the clapper's warning. Each completes the other. The golden glow that people admire does exist. It shines on temples, literature, and science. The glow also backlights the silhouettes of those turned sideways by hierarchy. The achievement of the Gupta world lives in that tension. It built a civilization that felt coherent enough to be copied for half a millennium and unequal enough to keep its own critics quiet. The inscriptions did not promise equality. They promised order, prosperity for patrons, and prestige for the pious. The system delivered exactly that. It even engraved the delivery note in Sanskrit on stone. For our next story, we explore the life and achievements of Sun Tzu, the art of war. He is the most famous general who might never have existed, and yet still managed to run the modern business section at every airport. Sun Tzu, also known as Sun Wu, stepwalks into the historical record, not with a birth certificate, but with a biography written more than 400 years after he supposedly lived. That biography includes the single most notorious HR incident in ancient Chinese history, the concubine drill. It's a scene that lives rent-free in collective memory because it is outrageous, cinematic, and probably embellished to the point of fan fiction. And it sits right next to a slim, surgical book. 13 relentless chapters, a few thousand terse characters. That keeps winning wars and meeting quarterly targets for roughly 2,500 years. The oldest detailed source for Sun Tzu is Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, the Shiji, compiled around the 1st century B. In Sima Qian's telling, Sun Tzu serves King Helu of the state of Wu, helps smash the powerful state of Wu, helps smash the powerful state of Chu in 506 B, and becomes a legend. Now the twist. The Zhuo Jia, a near-contemporary chronicle that thrives on naming and shaming spring and autumn era VIPs, gives the play-by-play of those same wars, but omits any mention of Sun Tzu. Silence in a text that gossipy is suspicious. The plot thickens, but it also gets cooler. The archaeology eventually walks in wearing sunglasses. In 1972, diggers in Shandong pried open 2 Western Han tombs at Yinquishan near Linyi and found the receipts. Thousands of bamboo strips, including 2 separate military treatises, one labeled Sunzi and another Sun Bin. The tombs date to roughly the 2nd century B, a good century before Sima Qian wrote, which means both texts were already canonical by then. That discovery doesn't cancel every argument, but it catapults Sun Tzu out of the vapor of legend and into a pre-imperial library that real people carried to their graves. The book existed early. The general behind the name, that stays contested, which honestly suits the world's favorite apostle of deception. Sima Qian's biography arranges the story with crisp, dramatic beats. King Helu of Wu, 514 to 496, Bas, ascends the throne with help from the hard-charging statesman Wu Zixu. Wu is a rising coastal power in the lower Yangtze, sleek boats, big ambitions, and the good luck of being underestimated. Chu is a behemoth, inland, lush and smug, ruling from Ying, the play. In 506 Ba, Wu's forces surge north, notch 5 consecutive victories against Chu, and take Ying. Qin Zhao of Chu evacuates in hurry-up mode. Wu parks in the enemy capital. The neighbors freak. Qin intervenes the next year. 505 barge, and shoves Wu back. Sun Tzu's name, in Sima Qian script, glows inside that operation. A kind of war room ghostwriter who nails the speed, the deception, and the logistics. The concubine drill scene acts as a sizzle reel. That drill is famous because it is impossible to forget. The king offers Sun Tzu the palace women to prove he can teach discipline to anyone. The order is clear, the drum signals bang, and the women laugh. According to Sima Qian, Sun Tzu punishes the officers in charge. Fatally, the training resumes. The women obey. The king suddenly discovers limits to his appetite for efficiency. Sun Tzu replies with something equivalent to command me or fire me, but don't expect results without discipline. It functions as an executive summary for the art of war. Define terms, enforce systems, remove ambiguity, and mean it. Most historians wave a polite yellow flag at the literal truth of the episode. It smells like a parable built to sell the idea of ruthless clarity. Whether it happened or not, it sticks because it captures the uncomfortable heart of command. The real Sun Tzu, if there was a single Sun Tzu, would have lived somewhere in the late 6th to early 5th century B. The text attributed to him, the Sunzi Bingfa, looks like a layered manuscript, honed by generations. It is short, surgical, and specific. 13 chapters, a few thousand classical Chinese characters. Scholars usually say around 6,000. It opens with a thunderclap. War is a matter of vital importance to the state. Vital, not glorious. He does not romance battle. He audits it. Chapter 2, on waging war, hits with a money column. Fielding massed forces drains treasure every day, until soldiers fear the quartermaster more than the enemy. Siege warfare is called a last resort because it eats lives and budgets with gluttonous enthusiasm. This is not a charge the hill sermon. This is a CFO with a helmet. The lean brilliance is that he reduces grand strategy to a handful of coordinates anyone can carry into the field. 5 constant factors: the way, moral alignment, cohesiveness, heaven, weather, timing, earth, terrain, distance, the commander, virtue and ability, and method, organization, logistics. He opens with this inventory, because it's the part that leaders pretend is boring until it bites them. The book might be 2,500 years old, but it drags the same human weaknesses to the surface. Then the line that launched 1,000 PowerPoints. All warfare is based on deception. That sentence began, moonlighting on corporate slides the moment the first translation hit Europe. The meaning in context is not an endorsement of lying for sport. It is a technical definition of advantage. Surprise shapes the fight before it starts. Inside that concept is one of Sun Tzu's signature ideas. She. Potential, energy, or strategic configuration. The army with She doesn't just win. It makes victory easy. It is terrain, morale, timing, logistics, deception, and readiness fused into a pressure gradient. He compares good generalship to water, which picks the path of least resistance and still wrecks everything in its way. The metaphor is not pretty poetry. It's a physics lesson. Now the hottest myth gets hauled on stage and politely escorted off. Sun Tzu is a pacifist. He is not. He is a minimalist. He wants to subdue the enemy without fighting, because it is the cheapest and most reliable way to win. But Chapter 12, on fire attacks, reads like a field guide to arson. Chapter 13, on espionage, lays out categories of spies: local, inward, converted, doomed, and surviving, and says intelligence decides wars. If morality gets in the way of good espionage, he does not care. He is the weird combination of humane and ice-cold. The text condemns long wars and wasteful slaughter as incompetent leadership. It recommends terror by fire when it strategically matters. The paradox is not awkward. It is balanced through efficiency. Sun Tzu detests hero worship. He inventories 5 ways a commander can implode an army: recklessness, which leads to destruction; cowardice, which courts capture; a quick temper, which makes him baitable; a false sense of honor, which makes him fragile under insult; and over-solicitude for his men, which generates paralysis. People love the idea of fearless lions. He lists fearlessness as a liability the moment it outruns judgment. It reads like a performance review that no one wants in their inbox. So what did he actually do? The historical footprint that can be talked about with teeth lies in Wu's campaigns against Chu and the political ecosystem of the late spring and autumn period. Wu is the upstart, considered culturally peripheral, by central states that speak more properly and pre-in more loudly. Under King Helu, Wu hits its stride. Wu Zixu, the architect of Wu's rise, knows Chu's weaknesses intimately because he has a long, bitter feud with Chu. His family was executed there. His vendetta is epic, and his advice is lethal. Sima Qian pairs him with Sun Tzu as a tandem: policy and operations, vengeance and technique. Whether Sun Tzu personally deployed formations in 506b cannot be proven. But the victory chain, 5 battles culminating in the capture of Ying, is a hard fact in multiple sources. The state of Wu rules in Chu's capital, just long enough to write emails about office renovations. By 500, and 5 Bais Jin barges in, throws elbows, and pressures Wu to retire south. Wu is not finished. It remains a regional power into the early 5th century. Then, Schadenfreude arrives in 473 BC, when Yue, Wu's neighbor and former punching bag, flips the script. King Gujian of Yue, famous for sleeping on brushwood and tasting gold to remind himself of humiliation, crushes Wu, forces King Fuchai of Wu to suicide, and ends Wu's run. The ironic math that never dies, having the art of war on the shelf. does not make a state immortal. It makes it dangerous, until someone with better she walks in the door. The text itself ages like a weaponized bonsai. It's compact, it's shaped, it stays sharp. The earliest extant commentary is by Cao Cao, 155-225, the warlord poet who forged the northern state of Wei at the end of the Han dynasty. Cao Cao's annotations show the art of war, not as philosophy homework, but as a live field manual. He reads the book like a practitioner who knows which supply depot is about to run out of grain. Later, Tang dynasty commentators such as Li Quan and Du Mu fold in examples from classic campaigns. Song commentators as layers of exegesis. The Song court, under Emperor Shenzong, in 1080 canonizes the art of war within the 7 military classics, mandating that officers study it. That date matters. The text moves from useful to mandatory. The book becomes institutional memory. All of this swims in a sea of pseudepigraphy. Ancient Chinese books love big-name bylines. Attaching a text to an eminent master is standard operating procedure for warring states and Han intellectuals who want to be read. This is why the archaeology matters so much. The 1972 Yingquishan discovery included 2 different books, one labeled Sunzi, the other Sun Bin's Art of War. Sun Bin is a real 4th century base figure from the Warring States era, associated with the state of Qi, and famous for outplaying the state of Wei at the battles of Guiling, 354 Bates, and Maling, 342 Bates, often coordinating with the General Tianji. Sun Bin pays for those wins with a very personal cost. Legend says his rival, Pan Quan, has him tattooed and has his kneecaps smashed. Sun Bin escapes, then obliterates his tormentor. At Maling, using one of the most ruthless tricks in the ancient toolbox, reducing the number of cooking stoves each day to fake desertions, baiting the enemy deep, and then killing him with a surprise crossbow ambush. The bamboo strips from that Shandong tomb vault, both sun texts into daylight together. 2 sun books, 2 suns. For centuries, many readers had treated them as the same person. The dirt says otherwise. This is the academic mic drop. The Sunzi found at Yingquishan is recognizably the text still studied today. 13 chapters, flowing order, familiar vocabulary. The presence of both books in a tomb, sealed in the 2nd century BICE, implies that the tradition of Sun as a lineage of teachers was already standardized by early Han. The authorship debate tightens to a practical consensus. Sun Tzu/Sun Wu, as a late spring and autumn military theorist, with a text compiled and polished across the 5th to plied and polished across the 5th, 3rd centuries Bas. Sun Bin as a 4th century practitioner, with a distinct doctrine, both folded into a single Sun family brand by antiquity. The concubine drill becomes branding too. Memorable, probably unliteral, functionally true about the principles it advertises. The Art of War's original audience wasn't philosophers. It was people who had to move men and grain across time and distance without dying. The text's heartbeat is logistics. Sun Tzu's war is a spreadsheet. With mud, armies need carts, fodder, weapons, spare axles, and the patience to move while avoiding bad terrain. A crucial line that gets less TikTok love, but chores the whole book. Protracted wars shred a state's finances and morale. He names what most rulers pocket. Reputations are cheap. Salaries and supplies are not. He specifically condemns laying siege, unless absolutely necessary, and even then only with strict time limits and cunning, poisoning wells, burning stores, bottlenecking stragglers, because battering walls is macho and dumb. He is ruthless to commanders who mistake theatre for tactics. He loves feints, ambushes, and night moves. He sees terrain like a topographer, on caffeine, hill crests, ravines, river bends, bottlenecks. He classifies ground into 9 types and tells commanders what to do on each. Dispersive ground. Don't fight. Rally. Facile ground. Keep tight reins. No overextension. Contentious ground. Rush to occupy first. Fight only if fixed advantage. Open ground. Maneuver. Don't be static. Intersecting ground. Manage alliances carefully. Heavy ground. Fortify. Secure supply lines. Difficult ground. Keep moving. Don't camp. Hemmed in ground. Improvise escape routes. Desperate ground. Commit fully. Aggression is oxygen. That last rule is the Sun version of a dead man's switch. Sometimes the only way out is through. So he teaches leaders when to press the nuclear button on morale and push soldiers beyond fear. Even here, the aim is efficiency. A fight forced on desperate ground reduces cowardice because it removes alternatives. He is not worshipping courage. He's gaming human psychology. The cult quotations pour out of every chapter. Attack where he is unprepared. Appear where you are not expected. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. The greatest hits playlist is so famous that it hides the book's strangeness. There is no long speech about honor. There is no metaphysical treatise. Instead, there is a chess player's monologue about tempo, bait, timing, and pressure. He treats knowing not as a virtue, but as a process. The final chapter exalts in spies the way some people exult in pastry. He funnels entire battles through the quality of intelligence. Suborn their officers, bribe their officials, turn their agents, use false rumors, fatten the treasuries of your double agents. And then he says it outright. Not one of the 5 matters of the army is more important than secrecy. To a Confucian moralist, that sounds like spiritual tax fraud. To a general, it sounds like oxygen. Commentators in later centuries keep retrofitting his rules with their own histories. Cao Cao reads him through coalition warfare and supply nightmares. Li Quan and Du Mu read him through Tang frontier campaigns. Song bureaucrats fold the art of war into a state curriculum. The text never gets gently placed on a shelf. It gets used. It helps that it fits in a sleeve and travels, unlike the 6 secret teachings or the methods of the Sima, which offer bigger, older chunks of doctrine. Sun Tzu is road-ready. It's built for commanders who must decide whether a dust cloud on the horizon is cavalry or merchant, and whether the wind makes fire attack viable at dusk. The West enters this conversation late and loudly. In 1772, the Jesuit Jean-Joseph Marie Amiot publishes a French translation, a book the Parisian salons admire without fully digesting. The English-speaking world gets Lionel Giles's elegant translation in 1910. Cold War officers grab Samuel B. Griffith's crisp version in 1963. A generation later, Ralph Sawyer produces a dense scholar's translation in 1994 with footnotes sharp enough to cut leather. The myth that Napoleon used Sun Tzu is precisely that, a myth. There is no evidence he read, a Chinese treatise that only a tiny handful of European intellectuals even had access to in the late 18th century. But by the mid-20th century, modern militaries absolutely read Sun Tzu. Mao Zedong, in On Protracted War, 1938, quotes him and folds Sun's thinking into guerrilla doctrine. Vo Wenjiap studies him. American officers study him back. By the 1980s, Japanese business gurus, American CEOs, and every mid-level manager with a weekend seminar treat Sun Tzu like a horoscope that finally makes sense. The tsunami of metaphors that follow market share as terrain, pry as deception, logistics as supply chains, vary in quality, but the spread is unstoppable. The hysterically modern part is how right the old math stays. Armies keep discovering that protracted wars bankrupt treasuries. Ignoring terrain continues to get soldiers killed. Surprise remains cheaper than brute force. Espionage keeps deciding campaigns. The art of war looks ageless, not because it is magic, but because it was built from durable observations. People hate hunger, fear, uncertainty, and follow competence. Terrain is stubborn. Time punishes hesitation. Organizations rot from weak incentives and blurred authority. Deception multiplies force. Sun Tzu wrote, "Elegant generalities that are small enough to adapt and big enough to matter." But the book also carries scars from its birth era. It still talks about chariots and ox carts, about burning camps, about massed infantry pushing siege ladders, about drums and flags. It comes from a world where bronze blunted swords and wooden wheels creaked. That's important. Modern readers who pretend the book's hardware doesn't matter risk cargo cult strategy. Sun Tzu is not arguing that every problem yields to deception and speed. He is arguing that deception and speed let a prepared army finish the work that logistics and morale began. Reading him as a genius trickster, manual alone turns him into a magician. He is a mechanic. The life behind the book remains cinematic, even stripped of legend. The timeline slots into a violent neighborhood of Chinese history. The spring and autumn period, circa 770–480, one Bess, is a long meltdown, a slow boil of alliances and betrayals, where Shang and Zhou, religious inheritances, are dissolving into real politic. States grow teeth with iron and population. Helu of Wu is a late-bloom king in that era. His general staff, Wu Zixu, Sun Tzu and Sima Qian's telling, various professionals, pushes Wu into the big leagues. Their victory at Boju in 506 Barch is the state's glorious peak. The crash that follows is not immediate, but it is downhill. Yue's final victory in 473 B ends Wu's career. Somewhere inside that arc, the Sun tradition takes root. If Sun Tzu is real, he is a cautious killer who wants rulers to win cheaply, not a field hero glory hound. If Sun Tzu is a composite, the composite is coherent. Either way, the text has a voice with the personality of a surgeon who refuses to overshare. The concubine drill still paces the room, powerful because the image refuses to fade. The king laughs, the women laugh, the general orders punishment. The laughter stops. Every Tell It Like It is leadership seminar longs for that punchline. The story's appeal is obvious. It exalts outcomes over appearances. It punishes giggles and rewards clarity. It sells the fantasy that a single act of steel can align chaos. That is why it lingers, and that is why historians treat it with care. The story's didactic functions click like beads on an abacus. It burnishes Sun Tzu's brand as the man who invented seriousness. And yet, the Zhuozhuan's silence and the rhetorical convenience of the episode put it on a spectrum with other ancient anecdotes that are too perfect. The critical move is not to cancel the anecdote, but to read it as a parable that distills a whole book: define, train, enforce, measure, repeat. The core of the art of war can be sampled in hard bites. Here are a few that keep showing up on tests and in ambushes, with their skeletal facts attached. Advanced calculation. The first chapter treats victory as something that gets purchased in the planning room. Leaders conduct a comparative audit on those 5 factors: the way, heaven, earth, the commander and method, and pick their fights. No amount of valor in the field will offset stupid arithmetic, winning without fighting. Sun Tzu rates the following as excellence. In descending order, take the enemy state intact. Take the enemy army intact. Take his battalions. Take his companies. Take his squads. The cheapest win is one achieved by undermining alliances, breaking morale, and manipulating timing so that battle is unnecessary. That line is thrilling, precisely because it was written by a man from a time when battle was the default. Speed and precision. Speed is the essence of war. He uses speed as a multiplier on surprise. He does not mean sprinting blindly. He means rehearsed movement, ready supply, and timing that hits the seam in the defense. Flexible form. He says, formations are not permanent. Change like water changes shape. If the enemy presents solidity, do not ram it. Find the leak. This isn't abstract. A chariot army behaves differently in a marsh than on flat ground. Infantry behaves differently in ravines than on plains. He expects commanders to change patterns until the enemy can't predict them. Command temperament. The 5 destructive traits: recklessness, cowardice, hot temper, brittle honor, excessive compassion, are the anti-resume. Confidence and mercy stay on the table, but as subordinates to judgment. Drama kills armies. Discipline keeps them boring and alive. Intelligence. Chapter 13 is the capstone. He names 5 categories of spies: local recruiting natives, inward, agents in enemy offices, converted, turning enemy spies, doomed, feeding false info to individuals who are knowingly sacrificed, and surviving, who come back with reports. He calls double agents the key to it all. If this sounds like tradecraft memos at Langley, that's because espionage hasn't updated its basic skeleton since bronze bells were hot. Fire. The text on fire attacks lists 5 types: burn men, burn stores, burn equipment, burn arsenals, burn supply lines. It names wind direction and timing like a meteorologist. Burn when the wind is up and dry. Do not follow up with a ground attack unless the wind calms. This is not a moral treatise. It is climate science for arson. Costs. Chapter 2 does the ledger math. He details the supply wagons, the armaments, and the daily expense, often translated as 1,000 ounces of silver per day, that make prolonged campaigns lethal to treasuries. With that toolbox open, the book's afterlife gets easier to understand. It becomes not a tome, but a loop. Assess, deceive, maneuver, feed, finish. Every age dresses it up with new terms. Cavalry becomes tanks. Tanks become drones. The logic remains stubborn. A satellite, in Sun Tzu's system, is just a fabulously expensive spy with good eyesight. Even early Chinese readers put the text to work across borders. In Korea and Japan, Sun Tzu is translated and recopied early by the Tokugawa era. In Japan, samurai strategists are annotating him for a world heavy on bureaucracy and sieges, but lean on pitched battle. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the founder of the Tokugawa shogunate, oversees a culture that reads Sun Tzu and folds him into Confucian training. Later writers like Yamaga Soko recommend sober strategy that would not surprise Sun at all. The book becomes a shared East Asian language of war, weather, and wheat. The catch, and Sun Tzu has one in every chapter, is that none of this guarantees a fairy tale. Wu's city of Gusu glitters for a while, then Yue shatters it in 473 bears. Chu recovers. Qin consolidates. Empires burn, bookstores sell out, and bamboo strips rot in tombs waiting for 1972. The art of war is a method, not a prophecy. It helps real armies under competent commanders push probability in their favor. It does not hand out destiny. Even the arguments about Sun Tzu's literal existence are proof of how hard it is to kill a good idea. Skeptics point out that the Shiji Sun biography feels sculpted, that the Zhuo Zhan's silence is deafening, that the Sunzi's internal vocabulary sometimes sounds later than the 6th century BE, that the geopolitics woven through it make best sense when warring states' norms are solid. Defenders point out that the text is fully present by the early Han, that the Wu Chu campaign skeleton in 500 and 500 and 5 Bais fits the book's lived concerns, that commentators like Cao Cao treat it as a tough field guide, not a philosopher's toy. The Yinquishan tomb bundles both camps in the same grave and lights a joss stick. The ancient owners considered both Sun texts authoritative enough to accompany them into the afterlife. That says less about celebrities and more about utility. The best way to read Sun Tzu is to imagine a cramped tent at dusk, ink on bamboo, maps on silk, an aide asleep against a wheel. Somewhere beyond that tent flap is a river bending around a hill. A fire could run up that hillside if the wind shifts. Grain is 3 days behind. The cavalry's horses are bloated from bad fodder. Somewhere beyond that, in another army's camp, the same math eats another commander's nerves. Sun Tzu's book is short because the night is short, and armies are hungry in the morning. There are villains and heroes in the orbit of Sun Tzu's timeline, with faces clear enough to draw from memory. Wu Zixu, for instance, walks out of Chu carrying his father's and brother's heads in his mind and becomes the anti-Chu whisperer to King Helu. He helps design the campaign that humiliates Chu, and later, under Helu's successor Fuchai, warns about Yue's patient fury. He is ignored. He dies forced to suicide, his body thrown in the river. That arc alone reads like a parable about ignoring counsel, exactly the kind of tragedy Sun Tzu's book is built to prevent. The Book of Odes and the bamboo slips both weep. The river rolls. Sunbin, as a later echo, helps prove the durability of the Sun tradition. The Battle of Meiling in 342 Bes is a mass grave of hubris. Pang Huan, vain and talented, charges after supposedly deserting Qi soldiers, sees fewer campfires each night and rejoices. This is the trap. The Qi army, led by Tianji with Sunbin's brain, waits in a gorge, crossbows loaded. They fire when Pang Huan's torches crest the curve. Pang Huan dies by suicide, according to some accounts. The difference between a brilliant career and a carved name on a bamboo strip is 2 good lies and the patience to walk all day in silence. Sunbin's Art of War, exhumed in 1972 under a Shandong hill, lays this out with blunt instruction. The family resemblance to Sun Tzu is unmistakable. Use the enemy's expectations like a fishing net. After the Han, The Art of War lives the life of an overachieving classic. It ends up in 1,000 scholars' sleeves, commentated by courtiers, monks, poets, field marshals, and dudes who want to impress their in-laws. Some Song Dynasty editions compile 11 commentaries in a single bundle. Others cherry-pick the best. The 7 military classics canonization in 1080 under Emperor Shenzong makes it official. The Art of War is part of an exam system for officers. Imagine sitting for a job interview and being tested on how to manage 9 kinds of ground and using spies. That is how elite militaries embed doctrine deep in the state. The text globalizes slowly. Western Europe in the 18th century is busy being European. A Jesuit's lyrical French Sun Tzu doesn't exactly crash the coffee houses. but the groundwork is laid. By the 20th century, translations bloom. Lionel Giles' 1910 English version is nimble and cool. Samuel Griffith's 1963 translation wraps Sun Tzu in Marine Corps efficiency, and generals start nodding in quiet rooms. Ralph Sawyer's 1994 translation arrives with footnotes and cross-references that map Sun into the Chinese philosophical cosmos. Meanwhile, on a separate track, publishers put The Art of War next to books about negotiation, dating, and fantasy baseball. The meme spreads. An ancient staff officer becomes a lifestyle. This is where the punchline lands with a wry grin. The reason The Art of War works for boardrooms and battlefields alike is not because life is war. It's because decisions under resource constraints and uncertainty look similar whether the currency is troops or time. Sun Tzu teaches process, not bravado. Leaders who crave heroism tend to hate him. Leaders who crave outcomes build staffs around him. Specific bits keep ambushing new readers well after the first pass. The emphasis on capturing the enemy's army whole. He doesn't want victory by annihilation if victory by annihilation, if victory by paralysis is on the table. Prisoners are assets. Captured supplies feed the winner. Unbroken institutions become useful under new management. He's not citing humanitarian law. He is citing economics and control. The line about an enemy commander's likes and dislikes, he wants them mapped and exploited. Anger him, and he attacks rashly. Humiliate him, and he overcommits. Offer trinkets, then snatch them back to test discipline. This is not a good place to look for virtue. It's a good place to learn to stop being manipulated. Weather as weapon. He treats heaven, climate, seasons, omens if needed, as leverage. Armies under rain move slower. Soldiers in heat tire faster. Crops ripen in their own season, and hungry enemies are inventive. He wants timing to turn weather into an ally rather than a headline. Deception specifically bounded by competence. He warns that deception with no follow-through is just theatre. The aim is to maneuver the enemy into a bad position, not to stage an illusion for strangers at the market. The book keeps dragging. Show ponies off stage. The relentless focus on soldiers' morale and pay. Sun Tzu's state feeds soldiers with captured supplies, partly to stretch budgets and partly to brighten eyes. He treats soldiers as rational adults with appetites. It is detached kindness, a practical loyalty that wants them to live because dead soldiers cannot hold ground. In the end, Sun Tzu's personal life remains a set of sharp shadows behind a bright book. His dates are tentative. His biography is a slow-motion collage. His legendary training prank looks suspiciously designed for viral spread in a world without Wi-Fi. But the achievements that matter are precise. He either authors or embodies the earliest comprehensive treatise on strategy that integrates planning, logistics, terrain, psychology, and intelligence. He gets paired with the greatest operational triumph of the state of Wu. Chu, humbled in 506 bars. Its capital Ying, captured, and earns a place in the Shiji's skull-lined Hall of Fame. His text births a commentary tradition that includes warlords like Cao Cao and literati like Du Mu. It survives book burnings and dynastic faceplants, gets canonized under the Song in 1080, resurfaces in a Han tomb in 1972, with a sibling text by Sun Bin, hops languages in 1772, 1910, 1963, and 1994, and gradually colonizes not just armies but entire managerial cultures. The art of war remains freakishly contemporary because it hates waste more than it loves drama. It asks rulers to win fast, to win clean, to win without marching battered men into walls for the satisfaction of looking brave. It wants leaders to understand themselves and the enemy so well that the battle dissolves before it costs blood. But when the fight comes, it gives them a gunpowder streaked cookbook. Use wind, use spies, use ground, and use time. He did not invent guile any more than Newton invented gravity. He named it with procedural clarity inside a civilization that treasured order and ritual but increasingly lived by speed and steel. He became shorthand for strategy because the world keeps making Sun Tzu's conditions: finite resources, unreliable allies, bad weather, imperfect information, fragile egos, stubborn terrain. That is why a bamboo strip manual with chariots and fire attacks educates drone pilots and procurement chiefs and pandemic planners. He is the tactician who refuses to gossip. He is the anonymous ghostwriter of 1,000 victories. He is the mouth in Sima Qian's book, the name on a tomb strip in Shandong, the line on a PowerPoint slide that actually means something. The clever final note belongs to the ground he walked, not his myth. Wu's capital, Gusu, near modern Suzhou, became a byword for gardens and scholars, not for kings who bulldozed empires. Chu became one of the main threads in the fabric of unification and collapse. Yue had its moment and vanished into dynastic time. The art of war outlived all of them by being small enough to fit in a sleeve and unsentimental enough to keep its face blank. Its author, real or composite, knew the survival game. People talk about grand strategy like fate. Sun Tzu talked about it like a market. He valued options, hedged risks, priced time, and spent blood like money. That, more than any anecdote with drums and palace women, explains why his voice still walks into operations rooms and conference calls with the same calm warning. Plan harder than the enemy. Move faster than his expectations. Feed soldiers before feeding egos. Win before the war starts. And when it must start, make it brief, make it precise, and leave with more men than glory. Next, let's turn our attention to day in the life of a daily life of a daily life of a medieval fisherman. Cold wakes you before the sun does. Not romance novel, ocean breeze. Cold. March on the North Sea cold that slaps through wool like a tacksman through an excuse. The kind of cold that keeps medieval Europe running, because today is a fish day, and more than half the calendar demands it. The church calendar counts roughly 150 meatless days a year in the later Middle Ages. That statistic reads like piety, and it spends like cash. Every Friday, all of Lent, dozens of vigils, plus local rules. Monks in Norwich count them, bishops confirm them, and the stomachs of London and Bruges enforce them. Fish keeps feasts, legal and bellies full. Your hands make all of that happen. So you roll off a straw sack that smells faintly of smoke and cod oil, and your first thought is not glory. It is rope, hemp, line coiled on a peg, hooks you checked last night, floats, lead weights, the small open boat outside that doubles as your office, your delivery van, and your occasional confessional. Today is not herring. Herring is a late summer and autumn theatre, with drift nets at night and Great Yarmouth turning into a city of barrels. Today is spring, and cod pays the bills. Haddock too, maybe ling if the line runs deep. Salted, sold fresh, or split and hung. The North Sea's demersal crowd lines the ledger like a family of cautious, steady tenants. Archaeologists in places like War of Aside on the Flemish coast dug the proof out of rubbish pits. Mountains of cod vertebrae, haddock bones and herring scales by the bucket. James Barrett and colleagues call the medieval takeoff In fish trade, the fish event horizon. Dry report, explosive consequence. The clothing routine maps to a weather report you learned before you memorized your own prayers. Thick wool hoses, a tunic that someone rubbed with fish oil and animal fat until it learned to shrug off spray. A hood up over a cap because wind cuts, and anyone who pretends otherwise eventually donates their ears to the cold. Leather shoes or boots soaked in tallow until they look guilty. No yellow slickers, no branded breathable membranes. Felted wool does the job. It had better, because water temperature in the southern North Sea in March skates around single digits Celsius. You do not fall overboard. That vow tastes like iron when you say it in your head. The gear checks carry you into habit. The line. Hundreds of fathoms of hemp, scrubbed, dried, and tarred. Tarring turns a critical plant into something like a patient animal. Pine tar comes up the trade routes from the Baltic. Stockholm tar is famous later, for a reason, even in the 14th century, and local pitch does the same job. The smell lives in your thatch, your tunic, and probably your hair. Hooks, forged iron, sharpened recently because fish notice laziness. Real artifacts in Flemish and English digs come in sizes fit for small whiting up to the maw of a cod that could bite your hand. No stainless steel, no perfect uniformity. Iron works, and you fight it with grease and attention. Baits sit in baskets already. Mussels from the flats, carefully pried and threaded. Razor clams if the tide cooperated. Sometimes salted scraps or offcuts from yesterday's gutting. Herring heads do well for cod in season. A little fish cannibalism in service of Lent. You never bait hooks on the boat, if you can help it. Boat time is precious. Shore time is for stabbing soft bait onto cold iron. A long line holds a beat like a song. Spacing hooks every 2 or 3 fathoms keeps them from tangling into a medieval sculpture of regret. Fishermen in later centuries write down numbers like 700 or even 1,000 hooks per line on the North Sea banks. Earlier crews worked in the same rhythm. Hundreds of hooks make you a small producer, and a busy one. The arithmetic sits in your fingers. 2 fathoms is the reach of both arms twice. Hooks at that interval make a line that runs out into a gentle curve down tide. You do not need to see a clock. Your line owns the timing. Your boat is what you can line haul over sand. Clinker-built planks, overlapped and clenched with iron nails, and roves make a skin that rides over chop, like a duck, not like a dead pig. The shape depends on coast and custom. A coble on the English northeast coast builds a high bow and flat bottom so it can land on shelving beaches. East Anglian boats carry the same logic. 8 to 10 meters, beam enough for stability. Shallow draft for the sandbar games your harbour plays. One mast stepped through a thwart, rigged to fly a square sail or a sprit sail when the wind wants to help, oars waiting to be honest when the wind lies. The finish is tar and more tar. Planks flex, and the sound of tight wood over waves lands somewhere between warning and lullaby. Dawn means push. Launching from a beach looks fun when a painting lies to you. In the flesh, it means shoulders under the gunwale, rollers under the keel, and the short iron truth that physics respects no one. Coastal fishermen handle launches with crews and neighbours. Today, the beach offers a pair of hands and a breaker that thinks you are comedy. Timing counts. A lift and a shove between waves. A leap, a jump aboard as the next swell lifts. A shove on the oar, and then you are free water. The splash that hits your chest proves the medieval North Sea can teleport into bone. Spray in 9 degrees forces breath, in a way sermons never manage. The sail goes up only when you clear the immediate mess. Oars get you through the sloppy zone. Then canvas catches, and the boat lunges into work like a dog let off the leash. You pick a heading that sailors knew centuries before the compass learned to sit politely in a box. A line between 2 landmarks fixes you in the water better than any prayer. Church towers serve as coastal GPS, long before ports funded dedicated sea marks. St. Nicholas Church at Great Yarmouth stood up by 1101, courtesy of Herbert de Lusinger, Bishop of Norwich, and its size advertises both piety and navigation. Big things on land, anchor little boats at sea. A windmill inland extends a line on a spire. A gap in dunes aligns with a point. The lead line does the rest. A lump of lead, a marked of lead, a marked of rope, and a pat of tallow on the base to bring up a sample of the bottom. Sand with shell, ground chalk, sticky mud. Old pilots wrote it down centuries later in rutters. Your fingers wrote it into habit a long time ago. The magnetized needle lives in a little box under a thwart. Men who crossed to Bergen with cogs swear by it. By the 1300s, compasses multiply along North Sea coasts, borrowed and adapted from Mediterranean practice. Day fishers more often swear at landmarks and tide. Every high and low tide arrives about 12 hours and 25 minutes apart, so the sea keeps lunatic time, not solar. Your bones count better than a physicist. You know where the sandbanks move and where they lie, and you know how far to stand off the notorious bars at the Yari mouth, because that's the difference between a good day and a parable. The long line pays out under your hand. The boat noses across a ledge and down a gentle slope where you want the line to settle. The anchor stone goes first. The line follows, coiled expertly so it runs without knots. A small float marks the near end. The current carries a slow pressure. Hooks drop. Bait glints once, then vanishes. Lead weights enforce obedience. The far end, another stone, another float. Wind and wave make statements, but the long line simply sinks into its practiced curve. Fish come to visit hooks out of greed, curiosity, or raw reflex. The cod that decides to feed turns into protein with a series of quiet little tragedies along the seabed. Here's the part that surprises newcomers to medieval life. Breakfast sustains like a low-key miracle. Barley or rye pottage thickened with yesterday's leftover fish, and an onion or leek. A chunk of bread with the dense dignity of an old sermon. A drink of small ale at roughly 2-3%, because no one wants to trust raw water in a town with livestock and shallow pits. This is not a food desert. Coastal villages often ate better protein than inland peasants. Fish, shellfish, and traded grain made a sturdy table. The frail romance of starving medievals every single day dissolves under the numbers in manorial accounts and in latrine digs that actually count fish bones. War of a sized as garbage middens produce cod bones by the sack. Not just lucky days, waiting for a line to soak invites work, not daydreams. Your boat is an open plan office, with no privacy and excellent ventilation. Bulks of wood demand attention. A bit of seam needs tar. Nets that wait for mackerel season demand a stitch or two. The netting needle you use looks like examples in museums. Smooth wood, pointed ends, thread wrapped in the middle. Hours of practice make a neat diamond mesh that would impress someone with an Instagram account, if those existed and did not drown in fish oil. Floats of cork or bark have to be checked for splits. Cork comes from far away, but bark from local trees or chunks of light wood can do. Lead weights shaped like squat teardrops show old bite marks from a workman checking softness. People use their teeth to test metal because tools were occasionally oral traditions. The sea insists on your attention with a promise. Gannets wheel and dive a short distance off. A gannet does not audition. It knows where the fish sit. Seabirds have been your colleagues since before your grandparents stamped their own hooks. Gulls testify to scraps. Gannets and kittiwakes mark bait. Porpoises roll in a quiet set that says fish are where they are supposed to be. The medieval sea contains whales, seals, and fish in a density modern people half remember from good documentaries. That abundance still comes with storms and short lives for fools. Anyone who reads the chronicles for January 1362 knows the name Groot Mandrenke. The Great Drowning. That storm ate coastlines from the Netherlands to Denmark, sank towns, and pulled men off boats like toys. You go fishing as a profession, not a dare. Line retrieval turns you into a machine that bleeds salt. You snag the float, heave the anchor stone aboard, and pull. Each hook comes up as a small punchline. Weed, bear, broken bait, then the thud through line, and into bone that means fish. Cod first, haddock second. The gills flash, the scales throw cold fire in the morning light, and there it is, the reason fresher fish sells dear. London ordinances in the 14th century obsess over fish market behaviour for a reason. Freshness means legal during a fast and pleasurable any day. The City of London allowed fishmongers' company privileges by 1272 and confirmed them in 1327 because fish outpaced other foods on those days. No one wants rotten fish at a good price. The statutes punish that fairly hard. You work without words because the line talks in your hands. It carries messages in a language with only a few letters. Slack, snag, wait, life. A cod the size of your thigh bends back and forth impatiently, then resigns. You club it. Fish do not volunteer. Onto the deck it goes, a splash of slick blood, and the faint sweet smell of seawater, and guts that never really leaves your nostrils. Another hook gives you a haddock with its telltale black, lateral line, and a dark spot behind the gills that old-timers call St. Peter's thumbprint. Medieval fishermen knew fish anatomy. Like doctors, they had to. They gut and gill for a living, not for a hobby. As the line comes in, you keep count and you keep time. Numbers matter because taxes happen to real people. Rents, tithes, and tolls. In some places, the parish claims a fish tithe, and the manor insists on customary dues. Towns collect market tolls under charters with dates like 1208 and 1272 that king's clerks would quote back at you without blinking. The vocabulary matters. A last of herring is 12 barrels, often around 9,000 to 12,000 fish depending on packing, and a customs official knows that number like he knows his own name. You are a dayboat. Longliner, not a herring drifter, but the same counting instinct runs everything. A stone is 14 pounds. A hundredweight is 112. A barrel is not a metaphor. It is a day's wages in seasoned wood. The weather watches your back and occasionally slaps it. Today you drew one of the good ones. Low cloud, a steady breeze, a visibility you could recite to a parish clerk. The little ice age had already started in the 1300s. So good days feel like tips. A little squall in the distance looks half-hearted. Even half-hearted rain feels like glass shards when wind pushes it. But you carry a hood and you do not perform for a crowd. Oars again when the sail tires or the wind picks up thick and contrary. Medieval seamanship looks like full-body exercise because it is exactly that. 3 miles offshore, in a small open boat, demands a body that knows work as its first language. Gut and gill happens on the return. A split along the belly, with a short, sharp knife that knows your grip. A pull to free the entrails. Gills torn out to slow spoilage. A rinse in a bucket because seawater does the work better than hand wringing. Cod livers go in their own vessel. They are not waste. Later, those livers will turn into oil by heat and patience in a pot. And that oil will light a home or rub into wood or onto skin. The smell would keep a saint humble. Your hands work at a pace that looks urgent, but never frantic. Fish go flabby if you rush, and sloppy if you dither. For haddock, you make careful cuts. If smoking waits at home, split fish hang better when the backbone still holds them together like a coat hanger. Superstition sneaks into routine around the seams where ignorance meets terror. In some places, the word rabbit never says hello on a boat. In others, whistling gets you told to stop in a hurry because it calls the wind stronger than polite. Saints handle the rest. Saint Nicholas holds a monopoly on seafarers' safety in half the churches from Dover to Danzig. Andrew gets his share in Scotland. Carvings of little ships hang in churches from the 1300s as votive offerings. Wood prayers on a rope, testimony that this boat and this crew survived a storm that could have eaten them. You earn the right to be rational and superstitious in equal measure when you live by water and wind. Landfall needs timing, like a wedding. The surf zone at a North Sea beach looks mild from the dunes and proves medieval when you enter it. You pull the sail and stow it, take the oars, and pick your moment. The bow must meet waves straight on, because a quartering breaker flips boats like playthings. An oar kisses sand. Another wave lifts and drops you. A short run up the beach. A shove. A second later, and you are above the next water. Your breath writes a short poem on the air. Local rolls and levers do the rest. A boat that slid down in the morning comes up in the afternoon, protected by skill and habit more than by strength. Iron Age physics with medieval patience gets results. Fish meets market on schedules that run like clocks, even without Yarmouth's autumn fair frenzy. Spring buyers know your return. A fishwife in many ports handles the sale. Women dominate retail fish in a lot of coastal towns, and records confirm it from London to Bruges. The London fish market regulations from the 14th century describe middle women and stalls, cries and measures. In East Anglia, all of that exists at scale. Buckets of silver go to local buyers first. Inns, taverns, households that want fresh fish for Friday. Big merchants handle bulk when season meets long-distance trade. You are a primary producer in a world that often romanticizes hard work and usually underpays it. Today you make it work because Europe's calendar and Europe's stomachs line up. Quality enforcement reads like daily anxiety. Great Yarmouth's herring, fair earned an ordinance in 1357 under Edward I that fixed barrel sizes and salt quality. Pack it right or face forfeiture. The crown wants tax, the merchants want quality, and the eater wants a fish that doesn't fight back on day 3. Salt is a currency you can taste. Good bay salt from the Biscay coast or Portuguese Salinas works better than Lüneburg's rock salt in some cures. Expediency shifts with distance, price, and the calendar. You cure what you can with what you have. Salt costs, wood costs, time costs, and faith in tomorrow costs. The most when storms own half the week on average. Fresh fish do not wait. A good cod travels by foot or by horse to town within hours. Pack it in straw, load it into a basket, and pay the toll at the market gate, assessed in pennies minted by kings who like their faces on trust. Edward III's silver groat weighs about 4.8 grams and buys a lot of fish on paper and not enough in practice when rents press and storms steal. Town reeves and customs men count in money. You feel like a rumor circulates in the next county. Even so, there is coin in your hand at the end of the day. Hard proof that you turned fear, skill, and muscle into someone's supper. Back home does not look like rest. If today's haul overflows, what the market can swallow fresh, the smokehouse waits, archaeology in Wool Riverside before you. And you Wool Riverside preserves smokehouses that look functional and patient. Racks, a low fire, fish-splitting technique built into every cut. Haddock and whiting take smoke beautifully. The fire sits low. Wood selection matters, and time knows no mercy. A day's smoke with the right wood gives a golden surface and a preservation that holds for days to weeks. Salt before smoke pulls water and readies flesh. Hanging fish by the tail makes the fat run properly and puts gravity to work. A medieval kitchen plays physics without textbooks. Drying racks serve when sun and wind do you favors. Split cod hung open like a book dries into stockfish. If weather holds and patience attends, proper stockfish takes weeks and the right conditions, which is why Bergen and the Lofoten Islands in Norway specialized in it and shipped mountains across the North Sea from the 1200s onward. English and Flemish ports bought it and ate it by the shipload. Hanseatic merchants from Lubeck and Bremen built fortunes on the fact that you can hammer dried cod to tenderize it and then make a stew that feeds people during Lent. You live downstream of that trade. Even if you have never seen Bergen's wharves, ports like King's Lynn and Boston in Lincolnshire list stockfish in their customs accounts, names and numbers that prove dinners miles away from where fish once breathed. The Hanseatic League's privileges in English ports show up in 13th and 14th century charters because kings liked customs dues and merchants liked not being robbed. Maintenance sneaks in while fish hangs. Lines demand drying and coiling. Wet hemp rots fast and smells worse. Pitchpots heat on small fires and get brushed into seams and rubbed onto coil after coil of rope by hands that carry scars you could map. Hooks need sharpening. Even iron tolerates whetstones. A net with one bad knot invites a bad day nobody can afford. The boat's planks want a check for sprung rivets or a seam weeping weasel-thin water. Iron roves hold because someone hammered them cold and square last month, and that person was you. Taxes become religion when the church gets involved, and that sentence is not even a joke. A tithe on profits or on catch meets expectations grown older than your grandparents. Some parishes and manors claim a set number of fish as rent. The Domesday Book in 1086 lists fisheries and renders for many coastal manors across England, and that institutional memory persists. The balance matters. The church calendar drives fish demand through the roof and then asks you to share. You live in that necessary contradiction without modern cynicism, because failure to participate means penalties, fines, or social death. Saint Nicholas hears an extra candle, whether or not the tithe leaves a sweet taste in your mouth. Myth meets daylight when strangers imagine your life as all storm, all saints, and no profit. The smell of your hands tells a truer story. Long days, yes. Occasional fear, sure, but also practiced craft. A community that knows who pushes the boat up the beach, and a trade that pays enough to see iron tools in your shed and a good capon on a meat day. People marry fishers, build net huts, lend to them, and sue them in town courts over debts for salt and barrels. Those court rolls exist and read like human life. The Paston letters in 15th century Norfolk mention herring shipments and sellers, contracts over fish at Yarmouth. Families that deal with fish end up in the letters of landowners because the money and the product matter. The afternoon slides toward evening, and the smell of home moves from sea to hearth. Your dinner features your own product because food travels shortest distance to safety. Boiled cod with mustard seeds and a handful of herbs grown with more love than science. A pot thick with barley and carrot. A cup of ale that tastes cleaner than the workday did. No one gives you a lecture on omega-3s, but cod liver oil already knows. Use. Children sip it under protest and grow straight, or that is the story parents tell each other while politely ignoring the faces their children make. Superfood wore a fish mask long before anyone named it. Tools go into shadow, like dogs after a hard run. The sail dries draped over a beam. Oars lean cornerwise. The lead line coils with its small marks, measured by the oldest measuring system that deserved a better publicist. The tallow-stained base finds its tin can replacement centuries in the future. Boots lie near the hearth to remember their shape. Wool goes on a peg, where smoke adds preservative function to its fashion sense. A knife sits, edge white with fat, so rust does not eat it before breakfast. Evening counts as workers' parliament. Not in a building, not even with a vote. On a beach, by a wall, on a bench. Tips about a patch of fish that turned up thick this morning. Reminders about a boat that almost flipped 3 days ago. And the low, constant note of risk management that lives in lives like yours. Storm surges in 1314 through 1317, starved half of Europe. Fishers still fed, many, because rivers kept spilling out herring, and coasts traded smoked cod like currency. Your grandparents told you those stories with the careful voice of people who survived. You carry them forward because memory prevents mistakes. But wait, the day does not leave without gossip from the world beyond your horizon. A merchant passing through spoke of a new fashion in Lübeck for more heavily salted cured herring packed in bigger barrels to handle longer trips inland. A change in salt and barrel size translates into a change in price on your beach. Barrels are not neutral. Wood costs rose in parts of England in the 14th and 15th centuries as forests retreated. And that statement comes with sawdust. More barrels mean more hoops, more staves, more oak, more iron nails. All of that turns into money on your ledger and tradition in your family. You glance at the net house, a low hut of wattle and daub with a stone hearth where nets can dry without mould turning your skill into compost. Walraversigshide has one, just like it, frozen in time by dunes and excavation. The preservation there smiles across 6 centuries at people who think they invented hard work. Charred fish bones tell menu. Clay pipes and cooking pots tell technique. The distribution of gutting marks on cod vertebrae across North Sea sites tells trade patterns and processing steps. Scholars spent careers proving with numbers what communities like yours knew in your bones. A line straightens between evidence and anecdote, and it points to your hands. You feed a dog anyway, because friends do not come more faithful, and they like fish guts enough to call for free. The offal pit a little ways from the house holds what the dog did not eat. At low tide, gulls provide cleanup anyway. Medieval waste disposal reads like a realistic novel. People composted what they could and threw away what they could not. Towns regulated smells and dumping in waves that broke on human bad habits. Paris legislated night soil. London fined unlicensed fish sellers and punished false measures. Even Yarmouth's fair, while famous, ran on rules so specific that a man could lose a day's profit by cutting corners on barrel hoops. True silence shows up after the second mug of drink. You feel the day is a series of muscle notes. Hands ache, lower back argues, shoulders pull tight like a badly set net. People who work metal have their own pain language, and fishermen match it in tone and volume. You sleep not like a hero, but like a man who earned new calluses. Comets or kings, taxes might attempt to intrude, but your mind politely declines. It leaves gossip to saints. But hold that, because a last check happens in a lot of homes. With salt on the doorstep, hooks arrayed like a regiment inform you. How many need rebating at first light? Rope sorted by length, waits like a well-trained dog. A small jar of spare iron nails earns a place of honor because iron is expensive and every nail holds a boat together. Tar, pine pitch, tallow, fiber, leather, and wood all share a shelf because the sea punishes unprepared. The little dry compass comes out to the threshold and goes back because night holds mischief and magnets do not deserve that kind of company. You step outside into a dim world that feels familiar and calm. Stars manage to cut through thin cloud. The wind carries the taste of the sea always, and of fields when it turns. A church bell tolls the hour in a tongue unchanged across centuries. The same sound told fishermen off Norfolk's coast in the 14th century and tells them now. Bells keep time and tell you you're still home. Saint Nicholas has heard all of your promises and chosen not to publish the ones you broke. A quick reckoning happens against numbers the clerks at Westminster like to pretend they invented. Your day's catch in shillings and pence rubs up against your rent in shillings per year, your tithe, your equipment depreciation in iron nails and tar by the pod. A storm next week could erase that small profit, and one burst of good weather in herring season could triple it. A lucky buyer from King's Lynn might stop by and ask for more tomorrow. A cousin inland wants stockfish and pays in wool, which you can trade for salt, from a man whose boat goes to the Zwin near Bruges, where salt and cloth sometimes meet under the same warehouse roof. A single day breathes like a lung in a larger economy that historians call the North Sea world, and you live at its beating edge. Your head finally meets straw, and that eternal North Sea background hum loses to sleep. There is no narration track here, no angels singing. The numbers that matter now are simple. You set a long line with several hundred hooks. You haul dozens of fish, pounds that translate into meals, and coin. You saw gannets hit water at 30 or 40 miles per hour like living javelins. You kept a boat upright through surf and slid it up sand with timed effort and physics learned from grandparents who survived times with more famine and less mercy. You obeyed a calendar that marks more than 150 fish days because popes decided, bishops signed, kings agreed when customs dues smiled, and people carried it forward with cookpots and shopping lists. A myth sits just outside the door, like a stray dog. It says medieval people were short-lived fools who lived on stale bread and lies. The ledger inside your head eats that myth for supper and asks for seconds. Real wages rose after the Black Death in 1348 to 1350 in many English towns, and the archaeology of house improvements and imported ceramics in coastal villages shows it. Fishers bought better gear when they could, and more salt when they had to. The industry scaled up in the 13th and 14th centuries under the push of religion and the pull of trade. The fish bones in Midden's plot, that baseline. The barrels in Yarmouth's Dennes map the market. The Hanseatic coggers loaded at Bergen underline the networks that turned cod from a local protein into an international habit. Every hook you bait before dawn in spring balances a medieval European economy's nervous system. Sleep lands like a wave, without a breaker. The room dims. Outside, the North Sea goes about its implacable business. Tides keep writing an old poem on your beach. Tomorrow understands its job already. The line will go out. The cod will smell arrogance on a hook and try to eat it. And medieval Europe will stay on calendar, because someone in a small clinker-built boat dared the cold, guessed the weather, and turned salt water into dinner.